At a bus stop in Seoul's Jamshil district, Park Do-hek was talking to his boss on his cell phone and knew the conversation would be unpleasant. He said he was waiting for a bus and would come to the right place right away. The director reminded me that the meeting was very important and asked me not to do anything stupid. But their conversation was interrupted by some event on the asphalt appeared a red streak that gave cracks that actively spread around. He listened intently to passers-by who couldn't believe it was happening and realized it was a dangerous outbreak. Many aggressively green-colored monsters with rather large teeth and strange eyes emerged from the red crack. Then people made sure that it was a flash and said that everyone had to run away, and then they ran in different directions. The flash was a phenomenon in which monsters could enter reality through the use of dimension gates that connected them. People were scattering and shouting that they were scared and needed to report the outbreak as soon as possible to eliminate it. Park Do-hek didn't understand how he was supposed to report the outbreak and realized that he should leave the place as soon as possible too. But his plans were corrected by the crying of a girl who fell on the pavement and called for her mom because she couldn't find her and was very scared to see her. Park Do-hek sat down on his knees and asked the baby not to cry and took her hand. He couldn't run away leaving the baby, so he wanted to save her by all means. The girl realized that she was not alone, and Park Do-hek took her in his arms to run away, but saw that the monsters were already near them. Park Do-hek looked at the monsters that stood just in front of them at arm's length and realized that this was the end and there was nothing further. Then he hugged the little girl tighter and squeezed his eyes shut, prepared that he was too late and the taking of their lives was coming and there was no way out. He squeezed his eyes shut harder and clenched his eyes shut when he heard a lot of fast and strange sounds and didn't understand why he wasn't hurt. Together with the girl, they heard someone asking them if they had been hit and if they were okay, which brought a look of surprise to their faces. They were addressed by Deus's chosen protectors and monster fighters they called the Awakened, and it was they who said that since they had come, all was well. Park Do-hek was surprised that the Awakened had reacted so quickly to the flash and had saved the girl's life and his, which he was glad about. In the office, the director strongly scolded Park Do-hek, explaining that the meeting was very important, and he didn't even bother to attend it and kept scolding him. He said that if there was an outbreak nearby, he had to drop everything and run to a very important meeting for their company. His co-workers were whispering among themselves, and his boss threw the envelope with the contract right into Park Do-hek's face, hitting him in the cheek. The director said that this was the last straw of his patience, and if the contract was not signed by this evening, he would immediately fire Park Do-hek, and that would be the end of it. On the way, he talked to a co-worker and said he would like to become one of the Awakened to make good money, but the co-worker said it was all nonsense. He dreamed of becoming one of the Awakened, as in his favorite computer game, then he would be completely confident in himself and his actions game, DF. His colleague did not like such thoughts, and Park Do-hek thought it was all after the principal had scolded him. Then the colleague noticed that his bus was already near. Realizing that it was indeed his bus, he ran off saying goodbye to his colleague, and the latter wished him luck, saying that he had to cope and prove himself. Arriving at the site at 6 in the evening, Park Do-hek realized that he had to sign the contract because he would not get a second chance. Thinking about the fact that he was obliged to sign this contract no matter what, he felt the earth go out from under his feet and an earthquake began. Looking around, he saw a crack of red and realized that the flash was happening again for the second time that day, which was very strange to him. On the other side behind the car was a man asking him to run as fast as possible in his direction to take cover and save his miserable life. Seeing and hearing him, Park Do-hek immediately headed in his direction at a fast run, but the monsters were already penetrating reality one by one and could not be stopped. He tried his best to run away from these monsters, but they were quickly closing the distance between them because they were much faster than them. One of the monsters was able to run closer to Park Do-hek and grabbed his briefcase with its green hand, which contained the very treaty that was important. Park Do-hek realized that the briefcase contained documents that were more important than life at the moment, so he struck the goblin with his fist despite his fear. But at this moment, one of the goblins had already jumped up and was on his way to attack him with a wooden club in his hands to attack the monster goblin. The man behind him didn't realize what he was doing there for so long and grabbed him by the collar and pulled him away from the goblins, taking him out from under the monster's attack and saving his life. The man in the red cap dragged Park Do-hek over the railing, thus increasing the distance between them and the goblins to a safer distance. Then he took out a small red card and used a special device similar to a cell phone. All the monsters turned yellow and were paralyzed. Then he said that this action can hold all the monsters for a while and they have time. He told Pak Dohek that the awakened would be arriving soon because he had managed to report to them the situation and the location of the new outbreak. Several vehicles had arrived, and some of the goblins were under the influence of special equipment, and the rest had already started to pass on. Ye Rank's Fireball. Kim Chuljin told the monsters that they would have a joint battle today, after which he planned to get the money. At the same second, he ordered his team to advance, and the goblins, seeing this, started attacking them immediately, and the battle began. Each of the team members used their own special spell, so they all had different martial arts techniques and successfully attacked the goblins. Kim Chuljin's Fireball delivered a crushing blow to the ground, after which almost all of the goblins were rendered lifeless and fell to the pavement. Pak Dohan was fascinated by what he saw and how powerful the awakened were and how they wielded various spells. Seeing that the battle was over, Pak Dohek descended and searched for his briefcase among the lifeless bodies of many goblins, for he needed a treaty. The awakened men saw this and asked him to stay away, but he said he just wanted to find something quickly. Kim Chul-jun picked up a crumpled briefcase from the ground and asked Pak Dohek if this was what he was looking for. Then Fireball replied that he was not to be thanked, for awakened ones like them were always supposed to help the weak people. He explained that Deus had rewarded them with powers so that they could bring justice to their world and protect them from monsters. The E-rank soldiers laughed that their captain had once again started telling how good he was to the peaceful people, to brag about his strength in front of them. They even wanted to argue how long this time their captain would show off, but one of the soldiers was dragged away by monster goblins in armor. Kim Chul-jun and Park Do-hyuk saw this and watched the scene, trying to assess the situation around them and understand what exactly happened. Then they saw a rather large and strong goblin who held a club in one hand and the lifeless body of their comrade in the other. Kim Chul-jun ordered Park Do-hek to immediately run away and find a secluded place to hide and wait out the moment, but he couldn't do that. Then Pak Do-hek fell to the ground and, shaking with fear, told the awakened that he could not move because he was enveloped in fear and lightning magic. Kim Chul-jun, who was preparing to attack, was surprised by this response and asked Park Do-hek to run away as soon as possible after he could start moving. He asked the other E-rank members to come to his aid as soon as possible because he was worried that he wouldn't be able to do it alone. Activating the fireballs on his fists, Kim Chul-jun shouted to his soldiers that he could buy them some time, so he asked them to hurry. Park Do-hek still couldn't move, but he watched intently because he was wrapped up in fear, but his interest and thirst for participation were higher. Unfortunately, the fireball attack didn't work, and Kim Chul-jun was defeated in 1 second, and the goblin took his life very quickly. Then the crew, realizing that their strength would not be enough, since the captain was defeated so quickly, shouted to Pa Do-hek to run as fast as possible from here. Park Do-hek didn't want his life to end just like that because he hadn't done much with his life yet, so he shouted that he would live. Seeing that the large and powerful goblin was already very close to him and was attacking Pak Do-hek, closed his eyes and wished very much to survive, and then he was awakened. The goblin was confused because Pak Do-hek was no longer there, and he didn't understand where he had gone. Not realizing what had happened, Pak Do-hek received a message on his phone that awakened Pak Do-hek could apply the skills of his favorite game. The message said that for a quick introduction to the system, he had all the skills open at once. The soldiers were yelling for him to run faster from there. Pak Do-hek received a message that due to the danger, his body control had been changed and all strategic and magical elements were available to him. Then, he was the first to use a magic projectile towards the goblin and attack the monster in order to survive and keep the surrounding people safe. The E-rank soldiers looked at Park Do-hek's actions and did not understand what rank he was, since he had access to such great strength, and it was amazing. The goblin did not have time to repel the enemy's attacks and could not see him with his gaze. Then Pak Do-hek used the flaming palm technique and released fire. The entire space around him and the monster was enveloped in fire, and he felt his inner strength that filled him and spread throughout his body. The awakened Pak Do-hek watched the incident carefully and tried to assess how much of a blow he had dealt to the goblin monster with his power and how to be. Realizing that his opponent was not devoid of life and was about to launch another attack, Pak Do-hek activated the shield that protected him. After evading the goblin's attack, Pak Do-hek activated his blade, which he then used a spell to use and succeeded. He used the enchanted weapon and delivered a devastating blow to the goblin and stripped him of part of his head and won such a difficult battle. Then he received notification that the danger had been eliminated and body control along with skills had been returned to its previous level. The training was completed. Such a message came next on the cell phone of Pak Do-hek, who did not stop receiving informational messages. The E-rank soldiers watching the battle couldn't believe that in front of them was an awakened duelist, and perhaps even higher since he wasn't just a mage. The next message on his cell phone was that Park Do-heng had become awakened from now on and could use force in times of danger. 20 years ago, magical towers of unknown material appeared all over the world, inhabited by a deus creature, as they used to say. There were outbreaks all over the world, and there were people chosen by deus to handle incidents from the creatures that came out in the outbreaks. And only after 20 years, these people were recognized as awakened, and this period was called the time of the prime of the world, so the story began. Pak Do-hek woke up in the morning in his room and held his head looking at his suit. He realized that yesterday's events were in reality. He thought back to yesterday's battle with the goblin and analyzed its details to understand what exactly happened so he could draw conclusions and become stronger. Pak Do-hek did not understand how he had an iron sword in his hands and how exactly it should be used to eliminate the enemy more quickly and efficiently. He distinctly remembered seeing the goblin warrior, and looking around, he didn't realize where he had hidden from his gaze, which meant he had managed to defeat him in battle. He looked and saw on the ground an unidentified goblin warrior's club and a lower rank crystal, but the goblin himself could not be found, which was strange to Do-hek. Pak Do-hek realized that the goblin could not go back, and the situation was not clear to him, so he decided to think about what had happened. Thinking over what had happened, he couldn't believe that he had actually awakened and destroyed the goblin, but his thoughts were interrupted from the E rank calling him teacher. He didn't understand what they were talking about, but the soldiers asked to be taken under his leadership because they had seen how quickly he had dealt with the enemy. They looked at him with rapturous looks and said that he was very humble and not like other teachers who were awakened. Pak Do-hek didn't really understand what they were talking about and said that they needed to clean everything up, and the soldiers replied that such a thing was normal in places where there was an outbreak. The E-rank soldiers asked him to become their teacher and lead them, especially since their captain had already lost his life anyway, so they begged him pitifully. Pak Do-hek looked at them and didn't understand, because a few minutes ago they had left him alone with the goblin, and now they called it normal, but it wasn't. He asked them to give him time to think, but the soldiers begged him to take them under his leadership, rather than leave them here to a fate that had surprises. At this moment, their conversation was interrupted by the people coming from the control room, and the E-rank soldiers were glad that they had arrived at the place as quickly as they could. 20 years ago, guilds from the awakened were created, and they are under the management of the only awakened management organization, short the UU. Lee Yunso confirmed that they had indeed arrived much earlier than usual, and looked at them to assess the situation for further report to the UU. She turned to the two E-rank fireball soldiers and asked them to approach her immediately to report on the situation of the flash that was. Pak Do-hek was frightened and decided to run away because he didn't understand what was going on and why he needed to control the awakened, so he fled. The two soldiers did not understand what to do in this situation and decided to run after the teacher who had given up on them, but they were hopeful. Lee Yunzo ordered her guards to do as they always did in this situation, namely, to chase after the awakened fireballs. After catching the E-rank soldiers, the guards asked what to do with the young man, whether they should catch up with him or let him go for the first time because he will still come back. After picking up Park Do-hek's briefcase, Lee Yunso replied that she didn't have to, because they would meet again and more than once. Waking up in the morning from the alarm clock, Pak Do-hek thought about what he should do, because the director is unlikely to believe about the sudden awakening and the battle. Pak Do-hek thought about what he should do in this situation and decided to start by learning his new abilities. He realized that he would have to survive in awakened status, so he decided to study his own stats and opened his laptop. Carefully studying the loaded page, he noticed that the main stats were 5, and he had seen such stats somewhere. Then Pa Do-hek remembered that such stats were in the first character in his favorite game, and so he repeated them. He thought about the fact that those awakened ones with 2 indicators were highly valued and paid a lot of money. And he had 3 indicators at once, which meant he was a triple awakened and could make a lot of money. He cheered so loudly that the neighbors behind the wall asked him to keep his voice down. Pak Do-hek began to think about how he could earn money and improve his skills, because it was too early to go to the dungeon. Pouring himself a glass of water, he thought about how he could make it so that he could increase his skills without fighting, and remembered about the mechanic spell. He decided to cast the spell, doubling the maximum level on the glass, and said, "Noble magic power, double this thing." Then he saw a blue-colored magic cube form in front of him and begin to print a glass of water. Watching the process, he was very interested in whether or not the spell would work. After a short amount of time, Pak Do-hek held a glass of water in his hand, which was a replica. Comparing the printed and real glasses of water, he realized that he had succeeded and his awakened skills were even better than in the game. He knew that relics had a subdivision into several levels, and those people who owned antiques gained energy and wealth. Many old items became antiques, but no awakened one had the ability to feel them and evaluate them. Park Do-hek realized that he had an identification skill from the game, so he took a cab to the antique store. He arrived at the nearest antique store where he stayed for over 3 hours, searching for relics using a game skill. Among the finds was Orth's ring, which was a rare relic and granted 3 rather curious abilities. But after so much time spent in the store, he found not only the ring, but other antique relics as well, so he was about to leave. The store clerk asked why he had been looking for something for so long since morning, and Pak Do-hek replied that he had a hobby of looking for antiques on weekends. Pak Do-hek was very happy with his purchases, and as he left the antique store, he saw his boss calling him from work. Pak Do-hek didn't care about his work situation now that he was awakened, so when he received the call, he only heard shouting at him. Interrupting the barrage of insults, he said he was no longer going to work for a company that didn't value its employees, and the director was horrified. Pak Do-hek said that he is not going to work where tasks are given day in and day out, and there are no weekends and vacation days, which does not motivate him to work at all. After hanging up the phone, he made the decision to go home and start selling the antiques he had bought that were heirlooms and might be rare. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud argument between 2 people where one asked the other to behave more modestly with such a low level of skills and abilities. The argument was ready to turn into a melee, and one person said that if you were hurt, you should be human and just apologize and not make a scene. The passers-by who were watching this realized that the awakened ones had started a quarrel, and it was better for them to move away so that the awakened ones would not hurt them in the course of the quarrel, activating their powers. The awakened did not want to put up with it and decided to settle their issue by the method of who is stronger and who has more skills and abilities. At that moment, Lee Yun-so appeared and threw the opponents aside and said that fighting was forbidden and they had broken the law. Lee Yun-so was telling the awakened to read the manual well and reread the manual, and preferably several times, and not to let this happen again. She said that she forgives them for the first time for such antics, but if they violate again, they will be sent to jail for a long time. The watching crowd of passers-by shouted to Lee Yun-so that she was very beautiful and handled the intruders so easily despite being a girl. Pak Do-hek watched him intently, and she called out to him as a guy in an Olympics with a heavy bag full of purchases from an antique store. Calling him by name, he realized that she was calling for him, and there were displeased looks in the crowd because such a beauty had not addressed them. Lee Yun-so asked him to pick up his own item that he had left at the flashpoint last time, namely a briefcase with his work documents. Arriving at the awakened control organization, she offered him coffee, apologizing that there was only instant, and it didn't taste good. After sitting down at the table, Park Do-hek asked about his belongings, and Lee Yun-so returned the briefcase to him, apologizing for digging through it to find the owner's name. Then she finished with the formalities and got down to business, saying that after the report of the awakened ones, she realized that the goblin was defeated by him alone without everyone else. Lee Yun-so said she had no plans to hire him, but if he was an awakened person, he had to register and pass a quick background check. Afterward, Lee Yun-so wanted to tell him exactly how the inspection was going, and Park Do-hek agreed to undergo it to determine the current status. After a while, he was informed that the inspection was over, and he could pick up his personal belongings from the check-in table and walk over to Lee Yun-so, who was waiting for him. Lee Yun-so stopped Park Do-hek and asked him to sit down since the results were already ready, and the characterization was different from usual. Lee Yun-so told him that she wanted to explain everything to him, and he felt that he was worried a lot internally, but tried not to show his appearance and his feelings. Pak Do-hek clarified whether everything was fine or if his numbers were too low, and he should be careful outdoors and during outbreaks. Then Lee Yun-so handed him a black with the results of the inspection and said that it was stamped approved, which meant that everything was fine and he could use the skills. After which she wished him luck as an awakened one and a long life, because with these stats, it could get quite short. Park Do-hek didn't like the girl's speech very much and told him where the exit from the awakened management building, which was a government building, was. The inspector asked Lee Yun-so why she was so kind to the young man, since he had no prospects at all according to the indicators. Smiling, she replied that it was all purely about her personal curiosity, which was why she had spoken to him in that tone. At the exit of the awakened management organization, he was surrounded by a crowd of representatives from various guilds who paid no attention to Do-hek. They invited all newcomers to join their guild, but Pa Do-hek was uninterested because he had low stats and level. He was very happy that he managed to stay in the shadows and did not want to attract attention because his goal was to make a lot of money and no more work. When he got home, he tried to copy the rare relic, but creating a copy failed as his current level was not enough. After realizing this, he decided to inspect the other relics, among which were Choi Gyu-sun's championship belt, fountain pen, and Kim Ok-bun's teapot. For starters, Pak Do-hek put the ring on and decided to go to Deus.net to find out its auction value and auction his own in Deus. He decided to copy the remaining items and put them up for further auction, and Deus Mart closed auctions. Ri, an awakened gunslinger, saw a fountain pen at the auction and was surprised because the auction rarely had such items as heirlooms. This pen raised the level of wisdom and took part in the auction. She still managed to win, and he a pre-publivite pen that was very happy. In the White Lotus Guild building, the girl was keeping an eye on the latest deals on Deus.net, and Min Sung-yul was surprised by the rare relics on the market there. The White Lotus master of the best guild in the Republic of Korea, Kang In-han, was interested in the summary of the last auction and who the seller was. He realized that an ordinary vendor couldn't sell one rare and one ordinary relic, one of which had already been acquired as it was too complicated. Deputy Chief Min Sonal said the seller had a new ID and no data, so she did not realize who she was dealing with. She realized that these were relics that were unlikely to be found even if you went through 30 dungeons, so they couldn't belong to a newcomer. Kang In-han speculated that the seller had a hidden ability from the government to find rare relics that could greatly affect everything around him. Min Sung-yul said that with a normal awakened license, there would be no way to sell common and rare relics, which meant that there was something wrong here. Kang In-han then decided to contact the developers to provide information about the seller to understand the whole situation. Min Sung-yul was happy about this and thanked her dear one for understanding and being quick to get control of everything. Pak Do-hek was tasked with doing 50 push-ups to gain experience points, and it was a very easy and quick task for him. After completing the task, the awakened Pak Do-hek went to the 11th level and reached the second class of mage, which was a great surprise. Tired of the activity, he didn't think he'd be able to get points for tasks like in the game and allocate them to the right stats. Thus, he was slowly but successfully progressing towards the ideal characteristics of a mage that he had planned for character development. He then moved on to improving passive skills such as movement spell and concentration that helped him focus. In the game, these spells were mandatory in order for a mage to defeat any monster, so they were very valuable to him now. Pak Do-hek knew that these skills could only be obtained through training, so he actively practiced running and other sports. During the run, he tried to activate the strong and resistant armor, but the concentration spell failed, and it was cancelled. Pak Do-hek wasn't going to give up knowing that nothing works the first time, so he wanted to try again and again until he realized how to do it right. He decided to keep trying until he succeeded, and his attempts were well over 20, but he didn't want to give up on this one. The children playing in the playground ran after the ball and were surprised that Pak Do-hek ran for so long and did not get tired. They did not know that he was awakened. The boys' ball rolled into the roadway, and one of the boys ran very fast for the soccer ball to get back to the game and didn't look around. Seeing that a car was approaching him, the other guys shouted at him to be careful and look around, but it was almost too late. Pak Do-hek saw that the boy did not hear his friends and ran directly under the wheels of the car, immediately ran towards him to protect him. He rushed as hard as he could to push the boy away and save his life, even if it was at the cost of his own life. Realizing that he had caught up to the boy, but not in time to save them from collision, he tried once more to use the spell of strong steel armor. This time he managed to activate the spell, and his body began to be covered in a shield of blue color, and he stopped the car that was rushing towards them. Shattering the windshield, he felt a scratch on his cheek, but stood and watched the spell work, and realized it wasn't fully working. Then he thought why the spell of powerful steel armor didn't cover the whole body completely, which meant more training and effort was needed. Turning around, Pak Do-hek asked the kid if he was okay and if he had been hit, because he hoped he had managed to save his life from the collision. The kid was thrilled with the situation and told Hyun that he must have been a real hero and Do-hek wouldn't admit to being awakened. Pak Do-hek was confused by the child's words and looked at him to assess the damage and see if he had done the right thing. Before it came the rules that stated that magic points were taken off for using spells that were not restored. After looking at the rescued boy, he reported that he too was fine and was glad that nothing had happened to the child and he had managed to save his life. Passers-by discussed that they saw the child almost get hit and wanted to call an emergency ambulance to check on his health. Noticing that too many people had gathered, Pak Do-hek said he had to go, but the boy grabbed his hand because he was very grateful. Holding his hand, the boy asked him to say his name, only to say the name so he could remember his truest hero. Park Do-hek was confused and afraid that the whole neighborhood would talk about him, but it would be wrong to refuse the child. Then he introduced himself to the boy and said that he was a superhero, so his name should not be told, but kept secret and never told anyone else. The rescued boy agreed that this information would be their secret, and he promised never to tell anyone under any circumstances. Park Do-hek asked the boy to play near the road very carefully and always look around before entering the roadway, and to be careful in general. A crowd of random passers-by were surprised that the man who saved the boy just ran away and fled in an unknown direction. They asked the boy if he knew the man, and he replied that he was not familiar with him and did not know his name because he had made a promise to a superhero. In the evening, Park Do-hek came to the bargaining table to receive money for the belt and pen he had auctioned and successfully copied. The buyers reported that they had transferred 1,053,000,000 won to his account and were waiting for confirmation of enrollment. He was very happy about it. Then Park Do-hek pulled out his phone to update his bank balance and check incoming cash receipts from the auction at the mart. Seeing the state of his account, he was happy because he had never had more than 10 million won before, and he was happy that he had. The buyers thanked him for the deal and told him they would be sure to take care of these relics, then left with their new purchases. The next day, he went to the bus stop where the bus ran to the road of the awakened that led to the office of the awakened. Looking at the schedule, he realized he had about 15 more minutes, but then he felt an earthquake under his feet and realized what it was. He realized that this was a precursor to the Flash, so he started looking around to see where exactly the interdimensional gate was opening. Park Do-hek saw a passerby fall to the ground and reported that the Flash was right above them upstairs, and it was very dangerous to civilians. Park Do-hek looked up in horror and realized that the Flash was right above his head and there was nowhere to run, so he had to attack. Looking carefully at the flashpoint, he tried to assess the situation and saw that spears were flying at him in great numbers and in different directions. He was able to dodge them, and did so with great speed and clarity in his movements, applying a magical shield to protect his own life. Seeing the spears fall into the ground, he realized that the monsters were capable of piercing the ground with their spears, which was very surprising to him. Park Do-hek realized that he was now facing a difficult battle with a special kind of monsters that were stronger than those he had seen before. Through the flash, he saw the glasses and the aged face of the monsters, in contrast to which was a young body that looked very strange and ambiguous. He remembered that in his favorite game, he used to catch such monsters that created unusual things out of boredom, and realized that he was facing dwarves. Park Do-hek, seeing the dwarf, wanted to launch an attack so that the opponent would be killed before he launched his attack, so he tried to do everything quickly. But the lady with the sword in her hand shouted, asking them to stop, and asked the dwarf to fight her, much to Park Do-hek's surprise. She was not frightened by the dwarf's crossbow, and immediately took to attacking the enemy in a leap, swooping straight at the dwarf, but did not expect that he was not alone there. The dwarf realized he couldn't do it alone, and telepathically signaled to his brethren that a general gathering was required. At the same second, a few more dwarves came out of the flash, and immediately aimed their crossbows at the lady who was not prepared for this turn of events. The girl realized that she would not be able to repel the attack, and prepared for the many arrows to enter her body. In that second, her body was covered in a steel shield of blue color, and she didn't realize what was happening, but she had absolutely no control over her body. Park Do-hek, who used a spell to save the girl, said he barely had time to block the attack and save her. She turned around and was extremely surprised that the guy standing next to her had saved her by using a spell she hadn't seen from the awakened before. One of the dwarves was very angry and asked her not to look around while he made the attack, but to look only at him and memorize her enemy. Then she blocked the attack by crossing her arms, which had iron armor that blocked many kinds of attacks. Park Do-hek applied a spell of magic harmony and pole coherence, launching a magic projectile that immediately attacked all the dwarves in armor. The lady was very surprised at such a technical level of the Park Do-hek standing in front of her, since he was statistically only a novice awakened one. He asked her to leave this place because it was dangerous, but she said she was also awakened and should fight since she was not a novice. Then he asked her to look at the warrior in armor and informed her that she now understood why he had asked her to leave, so she did not resist. Looking into the eyes of such a strong warrior in armor, the lady was very frightened and could no longer move without understanding what was happening. Park Do-hek explained that it was the power of the higher monsters, and now she wouldn't be able to move for a while, so she needed a safe place. Realizing he had time to argue with the girl, Park Do-hek picked up her body in his arms and carried her to a safer place where she could rest. He assumed that despite the shield, she might have been exposed to multiple arrows and would need time to recover. So he asked her to stay in this place for the time being and not to go anywhere until the danger had passed, and she agreed, realizing that it was necessary. Pak Do-hek asked the lady for permission to use her rapier in this battle, and she agreed to lend it to him because he had no weapon. After studying the rapier with his ability, he realized that it would increase his stamina by 10 points, and said that it would be enough. Then he climbed to the roof of the building to assess the situation and saw 10 dwarves and 9 gunmen who had different levels of attack. Among them was one captain, that strong monster warrior in armor. Pak Do-hek realized that with this equipment, he would not be able to deal with the captain with the steel shield, so he decided to attack the minions first. Once again applying the magic projectile and using the spell, he immediately attacked all the dwarves and archers to fight their boss. Seeing the result of his attack, he realized that the effectiveness of the magic projectile in reality was much higher than in the game. The surviving dwarves looked at him and were very angry because their brothers had been robbed of their lives. Then Pak Do-hek used another magic technique, and with a fear spell, one of the dwarves saw the other in the form of a dragon. The dwarf, frightened by what he saw, immediately used his crossbow to attack the dragon, thus taking his ally's life. He was able to use the spell thanks to the action of a fountain pen, a copy of which he had created, and under its action, he could cause hallucinations. He realized that the effect of fear was amplified by wisdom, but the effect was short-lived, so he needed to speed up. He cast a spell, but the armored captain easily repelled the magic with his magic-resistant shield, and Pak Do-hek looked for other ways. Then he decided to use the power of disharmony and enchanted a rapier that could deal 500 damage to the enemy, which was very good. The captain of the warriors held his magic shield trying to hold off the attack, but the rays of magic passed through it, and thus blocking the attack failed. Pak Do-hek told the captain in armor that he trusted his shield too much and hoped in vain to protect himself with it, so he attacked him. Then the dwarf captain threw away the shield, and Pak Do-hek was surprised to see that inside, the armor was an absolute void, and did not understand how this was possible. Pak Do-hek stepped back, not understanding how this could be, and what spell to use for the next attack. The armored gnome captain prepared to deliver a crushing blow to the young man, and activated his technical martial arts skills. Pak Do-hek managed to dodge the attack, and he once again decided to try the magic projectile spell that was already heading towards the dwarf. He managed to break through his opponent's armor, and jumping back to assess his opponent, he wanted to see what was inside the armor. Seeing the dwarf inside such large armor, he was surprised that this was what the boss of the dwarves looked like, because he was not very different from his servants. As he assessed the situation, he realized that he had managed to break the enemy's shield, which meant that his spells were starting to work at full strength. Pak Do-hek realized that the fear that was causing the shooters to hallucinate would soon wear off, so he had to hurry. Then he decided to end this battle as soon as possible, and once again used a magic projectile aimed at the gnome boss to take his life. But the gnome boss held back the attack with an enchanted piece of shield, which upset Pak Do-hek, and he decided to change his battle tactics. Pak Do-hek didn't want to give up and increase the speed of his attacks by applying spells again so that the opponent wouldn't have time to attack. But the one-eyed gnome boss managed to hold back the attacks, and he telepathically questioned what the young man was hoping for since it didn't help him. The boss of the armored dwarves was very pleased with himself because he was able to contain all of Pak Do-hek's spells and magic projectiles and block the attack. Pak Do-hek thought that the dwarf boss was mistaken in thinking that he was a simple mage and prepared another strike that was more powerful and effective. He decided to attack the unprotected part of the dwarf captain's armor over the top, so he prepared himself for a high jump to deliver the attack just so. Along with that, he reactivated the harmony spells of pole coherence magic and dealt a crushing blow to the armor-clad warrior. Thanks to the use of such a cunning technique, he managed to win the battle with the dwarf captain, and he was very pleased with it and his abilities. Looking around, he realized that he only had to finish the battle by taking the lives of the little dwarves who were already beginning to recover from their hallucinations. Pak Do-hek decided not to waste much of his time on them, and together with his rapier, he immediately gave them a crushing and powerful attack. The dwarves tried to hold off the attack, but they failed and were rendered lifeless in a few seconds, which was a great score. Pak Do-hek was glad that only their captain had the magic shield, but realized that next time he might not be so lucky. He realized that he needed to find second-class spells as soon as possible in order to gain victories more confidently. His thoughts were interrupted by Li Yun-so, who greeted him and informed him that they had started to meet too often in battles with monsters. Li Yun-so wondered how he managed to deal with this outbreak and the monsters alone, and clarified where Kim-in's girlfriend was supposed to be. Pak Do-hek said that the girl was wounded at the very beginning, and he carried her to safety at the beginning of the battle, because she was shackled by fear and arrow poison. Park Do-hek approached Lee Yun-so and stated that he would like to negotiate the amount of compensation for the resolution of this outbreak alone. He knew that if the awakened were involved in stopping an unpredictable outbreak, they were entitled to compensation in the form of trophies. Lee Yun-so asked him not to worry about it, and after counting the crystals of the defeated dwarves, reported that he would receive 500 million won. When Park Do-hek heard about it, he said he had to go, and Lee Yun-so didn't understand where he was going to go because the reporters were coming. Lee Yun-so clarified with Park Do-hek why he didn't want to give an interview and was going to walk away from fame and publicity so quickly. He said that he had no desire to throw himself in the public eye, so he asked her to settle the matter on her own. Lee Yun-so thanked him for his work, and Park Do-hek asked her to give the rapier to Kim In-'s girlfriend that she had lent him. Reporters came and asked Lee Yun-so where was the awakened man who stopped the outbreak alone because they wanted to know about him. Deputy head Jang Jonghwa entered the master's house, but she asked him to knock before he decided to enter her and apply basic etiquette. He apologized, saying he would then go out and come in again, but she told him to stop and tell him exactly what had happened so grand. Zhang Chonghua was a deputy in the Flower of Glory Guild and reported that there had been an outbreak in the Shinen area and no deaths. He reported that there were 2 F-ranked awakened ones at the scene of the outbreak, but only one of them, who was new to the awakened ones, handled everything. He was surprised that a novice of rank F could deal with a horde of rank E dwarves, using only magic and one sword-like spells. The master replied that she had only heard of the spells and had never seen them before. Apparently, it was a new kind of awakened ability that had never been seen before. Zhang Zhonghua replied that this was the first time he himself had heard that someone who had been awakened had applied and utilized his powers as a magician and alchemist at the same time. Based on the report, the awakened one used some sort of magical force field for the crowd, and Mater was extremely surprised by the event in the news. Guildmaster Lizzie said that before the other guilds woke up, they needed to take the initiative and get Park Do-hek into their ranks. Lizzie asked Jonghua why he had come to her after hearing such news, and he replied that he wanted to report the information to her. The Flower Guild Master was very angry and immediately changed her face upon receiving a reply from Jonghua, who didn't understand his guilt. She yelled that he should have immediately gone to the flashpoint and hired a rookie before the other guilds did. Lizzie explained that this was the first time they had heard of such abilities in a newcomer among the awakened, which meant he needed to be included in the guild immediately. Deputy head Zhang Chonghua apologized to Master Lizzie and said that he would move out immediately, otherwise they might have lost a lot of time. Master Lizzie couldn't take any more of this nonsense and gave him a kick to go find the newcomer already and not talk to her here. The deputy guild leader of the White Lotus Guild, Min Sonal, heard on the car radio about the new outbreak in the Shinen area and that a newcomer had handled it. Kim In-'s interview said that the outbreak was stopped by a rank F rookie named Park Do-hek and took the dwarves' lives with a single blow. Her thoughts were interrupted by White Lotus Guild Master Kang In-han, who had set a price of 3 billion to buy a newcomer into his guild. Master decided to set the price at 10 billion. But in return, Min Songyul had to pass the guild's internal test to raise her rank. Min Songyul said that she would use all her charm to definitely bring an awakened newcomer into their guild. Master asked her not to flirt with other men, but to do something that would benefit the guild. A lot of guild representatives gathered at Park Do-hek's door with a sign on it saying that he agreed to join for 100 billion. The representatives saw it as an unwillingness to join the guild, and apparently he thought he was too cool to put such a price on it. Then they saw that the deputy head of the White Lotus, which was the strongest guild in Korea, was coming out of the car. They were surprised that Min Sung-gyul had come here, and she didn't understand why so many gnats were coming, since they didn't stand a chance. Then the representatives of the other guilds decided to disperse because they thought that the newcomer already had an agreement with White Lotus. Min Song-yul said that they didn't have a chance from the beginning, but they still decided to come here for some reason, even though they weren't strong guilds. She explained that only with the wealth of the White Lotus was it possible to get such an unusual recruit, and they had no such opportunity. After reading the announcement of 100 billion won, Min Sung-gyul was very surprised and wondered a bit if the newcomer was worth that kind of cash. Deputy Guild Head Mukong Kim Hoon asked Min Sung-gyul not to address him or speak in such an arrogant tone. The representatives were arguing over which guild would choose to pay that kind of money to a rank F awakened because of obscure spells. Min Song-yul was angry, saying that it wasn't a spell, he was just an unusual awakened, since no one had used spells before. They kept arguing that the price was too high, but Min Song-yul thought that he was just looking for someone who would appreciate his talents. Then the deputy head of the White Lotus Guild shouted through the closed door for Park Do-hek to hear her and was sure he would answer her, but he didn't. That she would come next time to discuss terms that would suit the two parties and expected him to contact her. Park Do-hek was pleased that so many people were trying to get his attention, including representatives of the country's top guilds. He thought about the fact that he wasn't planning on joining any guild for money yet because it wasn't his priority. Park Do-hek realized that working in the guild required some sacrifices, and freedom of movement and choice could be forgotten. At the moment, he wanted to develop his abilities and strength, so he decided to act on his own plan that he had devised. After 5 days, he came to a forbidden area where there was a higher concentration of monsters, along with the relics he found. He had put together some armor suit that he had assembled himself from what was left in Shinin, and was confident in the strength and power of his armor, and even spent 500 million won on armored vehicles, and thereby raising the level of his statistics. The security guard of the area said that the training was over and he had checked his license, which meant he was free to enter the area. The guard ordered the gate to be opened and reminded him that the responsibility for preserving his life rested entirely with him. Park Do-hek was excited and serious about the battle to test himself and improve his skill level to become stronger and more resilient. Throughout the world, there were dungeons that belonged to guilds, but there were also areas where loners could come and level up. In such areas, monsters lived behind a large fence, and lone awakened ones could increase their ranking by receiving crystals. In such territories, monsters lived and multiplied, only so that the awakened could take their lives for crystals to increase their rank. Park Do-hek, watching the monsters from the tree, applied the harmony of magic pole coherence and released a magic projectile of great power. He had taken the monsters' lives without even touching them, and was glad that his stats had improved a lot and he wasn't the same as before. He wondered if this was what he meant when he received the message that he had access to all the experiences of all the awakened of different ranks and levels. Then he scattered the monster bait that was in his cooler bag, which was various pieces of raw meat. Park Do-hek already had some understanding of the level of monsters that were found in this fenced area and had developed tactics for his actions. He decided to have a little fun and attack all the monsters he could find on the territory to get points and crystals faster. The receiving department counted over 50 lifeless bodies, and very well preserved ones at that. The employee thanked Park Do-hek for coming to sell him so many and such high-quality lifeless monster bodies. The employee said he was willing to pay him 300 million won, and everyone else was surprised because it was the first time they had seen such an amount. Before calculating Do-hek's pack, the employee said that he had received a parcel, which he was going to hand over to him, because it had been requested to be handed over to him. After giving him the book, the employee apologized that they had to open the package for security reasons, and Park Do-hek thanked him for keeping it safe. The employee was very happy that such a talented person had come to them, and Park Do-hek, a little embarrassed, said that he was just lucky. He really wanted to avoid the noise and stares of the other awakened, but everyone was only looking at him because no one had so many glasses yet. Hen overheard the conversation and informed the others that that guy had gotten 300 million won at one time, which was an obscenely large sum. He was angry because they could make 30 million each, and they had to eat cheap convenience foods. They also noted that the employee had never been so nice, especially to them, so they began to feel hatred for Do-hek. They looked at Park Do-hek's happy face and didn't understand why he was acting so arrogant, even though he wasn't really acting that way. They believed that if he could use magic in any other way, it didn't give him the right to behave that way, especially in front of other awakened people. They were enveloped by hatred, and all of them together felt the desire to take Park Do-hek's life in order to get all his rewards for themselves. One of the brothers reported that they had been here for 2 years and had never seen him, which meant he was new, so they wanted to take his life. He offered to approach him from behind and take his life, then take the truck, money, and crystals, and live great the rest of the time. In addition, they would not be held responsible because everyone signs a contract that they are responsible for their lives in the area. The next day, Park Do-hek collected the lifeless bodies of monsters in a truck and was very tired of this action because it took a lot of energy. He reflected on the fact that picking up and loading the lifeless bodies of the monsters was much more difficult than taking their lives because they were heavy. The brothers watched him and were ready to carry out their plan that they had thought out yesterday and were already mentally dividing his rewards. Park Do-hek sensed that he was being approached and was about to attack, so he put up a magical shield to protect his own life. Hen said it happens when you turn on your brain, but it was too late to think about it because he was ready to attack again with more force. The brothers were happy that he had succeeded and asked him to finish the job to quickly get into an armored SUV and leave the place. But Pak Do-hek stopped the attack with one hand and asked why he chose to attack him, still with such a rather low skill level. He remembered that by law, taking the life of the person who attacked was self-defense, so he realized he could attack. Therefore, he easily used the Flaming Hand spell and attacked his opponent, who was unable to block the attack and fell to the ground. The enemy was defeated, and his brothers were in confusion and did not understand what to do in this situation because the enemy was stronger. Applying his fiery palms, Pak Do-hek took the life of one of the brothers and sensed a new attack attempt and turned towards them. With the spell, he immediately activated the magic shield and was able to repel the attack that was applied towards him. He turned towards his opponents, who didn't understand how this was possible and why their strongest attack didn't work. They realized that they had hit the target, but they didn't understand why they couldn't damage Pak Do-hek because there was no way they could have made a mistake. The brothers realized that they were most likely mistaken, and it wasn't a rookie in front of them as they thought before the attack started, so they decided to run. Activating the magic projectile, he asked why. With such low teamwork skills, they decided to attack him. Using a spell of magic harmony and pole coherence, he activated a magic projectile that struck Chainin. The last surviving brother was horrified at what was happening, and at the strength of the enemy they had attacked on his territory. He didn't want to leave it all for nothing, and activated his magic shield along with his sword to gather evidence of self-defense. He didn't care how strong his opponent was, because he couldn't use spells forever, and the shield could easily contain them. Then Pak Do-hek used a color jet spell that limited the enemy's view and visibility, preventing the brothers from finishing the job. The jet of color could affect the view of the enemy, and if used for a long time, it could stun, although it was not visible. But Pak Do-hek had a high level of wisdom, so he was able to take a life thanks to the fact that he used a wave strike combined with a jet of color. Coming face to face with his opponent, one of the brothers realized that the newcomer in front of them was not a simple novice, and they had misjudged their abilities. Delivering the final crushing blow, Pak Do-hek said they had to pay for wanting to take his life. After the last attack, he was sure that he was alone, but with his side vision, he saw some movement in the bushes, which means that someone managed to survive in such a situation. Then he turned around and saw that one of the brothers had managed to survive with a lot of injuries, and he wanted to leave the place sooner. Chainin begged him to let him go, and promised that he would never again in his life catch his eye or get in his way ever again under any circumstances. Activating a new spell of magical nature, Pak Do-hek said that he was not holy enough to let go of someone who wanted to take his life. With that, Pak Do-hek reactivated his magic projectile and hit his target in the form of the last opponent who lost his life and fell down. Chainin was in terrible pain and failed even one spell, after which his lifeless body fell to the ground. Pak Do-hek was sad that his opponents couldn't even withstand a single spell and thus were very weak awakened ones. At this moment, two people who were guarding the area with monsters approached Pak Do-hek and asked what exactly happened here. Seeing that there were 3 lifeless bodies around him, Pak Do-hek explained that he was about to tell them everything, so he asked them not to jump to conclusions. He wasn't going to run away from the scene of the crime. He was going to tell them everything as it really was, and that he was only defending his life. After finishing their story, the guards said it looked like self-defense, but they would check everything on the cameras, so they expected cooperation. They asked him to clear the area of lifeless bodies and follow along with them to view the video files. Pak Do-hek realized that because of these brothers, he would have to finish for the day and lose the money he had earned, which made him very sad. But his thoughts were interrupted by a stream of strong magic, and he asked the guards if they felt it, but they didn't know what he was talking about because no one was there. The guards thought he was overly sensitive after the fight, and one of them decided to go and check out the situation around them on the grounds. Pak Do-hek felt that the energy flow was increasing and asked the guard to run away now because the monster was ready to attack. But the guard checking the place didn't understand what the awakened newcomer could be involved in, because there was no one around at all and nowhere. Before he could finish his thought, the guard saw right in front of him a big white monster that growled at him and looked like a wolf. After carefully examining his opponent, Pak Do-hek realized that he was facing the wolf leader of the territory he had seen in his favorite DF game. He understood that such opponents were hunted in his favorite game and put up a magical shield because he understood what tactics he needed. The guard was very scared and did not understand what was going on, and Pak Do-hek shouted for him to run away immediately to safety. He used the fireworks spell on his fingertips and combined it with fire palms in order to increase the damage dealt to monsters. But the leader of the wolf pack handled this type of attack and continued to look at his opponent, waiting and assessing his abilities, skills, and abilities. Pak Do-hek realized that his attack didn't work because the opponent was too fast, so he needed to change tactics. The guards did not understand what was going on and why there was a whole pack of wolves on their territory, because all of it was in the cameras and he had not been seen before. The wolf leader, with his roar, called out to the entire pack of wolves that was in the territory, and they were all heading swiftly towards them. Pak Do-hek asked the guards to get into his armored truck and drive out freely in order to save their own lives. One of the guards did not understand what Pak Do-hek was talking about and said that they would help him in such a difficult situation because it was their job. Pak Do-hek refused to help, saying that their absence would help him much more than their presence because they were preventing him from attacking the wolf. Sanbi made the decision to listen to the newcomer and leave to call for help because they didn't have the kind of skills that could help. One of the guards, seeing that the pack of wolves was too big, said he would stay here and asked the others to leave. Then he began to attack the wolves with his bare hands without armor, but he was also watched by Pak Do-hek, who realized that he couldn't handle the whole pack. The guard was able to attack one wolf without armor and was so pleased with himself and his actions that he didn't notice the entire pack surrounding him. But the pack of wolves was very large, and surrounding the guard they pinned him to the ground, giving him no chance to leave the territory. Seeing that one of the guards was in danger, Pak Do-hek decided not to wait and immediately used a magic projectile spell. Realizing that they couldn't handle it all, the guards got into an armored SUV and left, saying they would bring help as soon as possible. Realizing that Pak Do-hek was finally alone, he began to assess the situation to understand his battle tactics and choose the right spells. Then he noticed that the wolf leader was ready to launch an attack on him and was also using magic to increase his strength. The leader of the wolf pack was applying a jump and paw strike. Pak Do-hek managed to dodge the attack, and he realized that he had definitely seen it in the game. He realized that if he managed to dodge this attack, the other wolves would immediately attack him. He was ready for it, and easily avoided the attack of both the leader and the pack itself. Then he decided to navigate through the knowledge gained in the game to develop battle tactics. He realized that the next step, the leader of the wolf pack would use another magical state to attack, and he would have a chance to win. Pak Do-hek knew that after using magic, the leader couldn't move for a while, so he waited for the moment and took the life of the pack. The leader of the wolf pack saw this and became very angry at not being able to protect his pack. Then he decided to use a symbiosis of magic projectile along with flaming palms, and applying the spell made an attack. The leader of the wolf pack, seeing this, tried to avoid the attack and stared intently at his opponent's actions, but was defeated. The guards checked the lifeless body of the wolf pack leader and questioned him about the three brothers and the means used. The guard explained that a black box was built into the truck, which was proof of the attack. Pak Do-hyuk realized that such situations of theft and assault could happen again, so he should be more careful. He couldn't rely on armor and armor alone, so he decided to get a companion in the form of a mini-drone because the level allowed him to do so. He ordered the necessary parts that had already arrived from Deus Market and decided to test his skills as a level 5 mechanic. He was very nervous because he was doing it for the first time and was just as worried as he was before doubling and copying rare relic species. Pak Do-hek hoped that the metal-covered measurement stone should make a wonderful drone and began the creation. He was worried and anxious because he was making an object that he had only seen in a computer game before. The fabrication of the mini-drone was already 50% complete, and he could watch the process forever. At this point, he added Avlin's wands to the mini-drone, which had a magic level and were used for magic projectile. A few minutes later, he received a notification that the mini-drone was complete, and he happily held it in his hands. Sitting on the roof of his armored SUV, he saw goblins and decided to test his mini-drone on them. He was very curious to see his creation and launched a mini-drone to gauge its level of attack. Pak Do-hek realized that the mini-drone was not different in appearance from the others, but was created thanks to a mechanics spell, which meant that it could reach very high speeds. A mini-drone made with magic detected the goblins and immediately attacked them with a magical projectile, taking all of their lives. Watching this process, Pak Do-hek was very happy that he had succeeded in creating the perfect companion for himself. After concluding that the power of the mini-drone was quite sufficient, he decided to check out the other functions and increase his mechanic level at his expense. He knew that he would need a level 2 mechanic to create the golem, which meant there was one condition left to fulfill. One reporter uploaded to her blog a video of Pak Do-hek that was rapidly gaining popularity and comments due to the action. She realized that with this video she would gain popularity and many people would know about Pak Do-hek, and she was very proud of herself in the fact that she had managed to get it. At the guild, the deputy chief found this video and asked the master to review its contents to assess the authenticity of the abilities. The guild master watched the video and realized that these were unusual skills for a rookie of rank F among the awakened, and wanted to see if it was a montage. Master informed Manhwa that she was moving immediately to accept Park Do-hek into their guild since he could be intercepted by others. Manhwa argued, thinking 100 billion was too high an amount, but the master said he was extraordinary, and they shouldn't miss him, just not him. She reminded Manhwa that when he awakened, he couldn't take the lives of different kinds and ranks of monsters so easily and quickly, which meant there was something wrong here. Master realized that if Pod Do-hek became stronger, 1 trillion would not be enough to buy him, because his skills would improve and he would become stronger. Grabbing Manhwa, she said that they were urgently moving out, or they might not make it in time since the other guilds had already seen the video too. Guild number 54. Big Picture Guild also dropped all the current affairs and went to the house of a rank F rookie, realizing that they might not make it in time. After such a video was published on the internet, Guild number 101 Black Comet also didn't want to miss out on an awakened one with such abilities. Guild representative number 70. Jayu was of the same opinion, and therefore immediately went to Pak Do-hek's house as soon as possible. Walking through Pak territory, Do-hek received a notification from the bank on his phone that he had received a transfer of 700 million. Looking at the screen of the phone, he realized that he was already neutral about such sums and used to receive them for the work done. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Lizzie from the Plum Blossom Guild, informing him that after watching the video, she was willing to pay him 100 million. Guild leader Lizzie wanted to discuss the details of the deal and insisted he enroll in the guild if the video was true. Pak Do-hek listened intently to Lizzie and tried to figure out which video she was talking about because he hadn't filmed anything and didn't know about it. Jian Zhonghua repeatedly told Madame that the amount of 100 million was overstated, but Madame Lizzie didn't want to listen to him knowing that he was special. Mrs. Lizzie asked him if he was still on the same terms, but he only specified which video she was referring to because he was not aware of it. Then she replied that Sohiri had posted a video of him on NeoTube and was surprised he hadn't heard about it or participated in the filming. Then he replied that he wanted to deal with the situation first and hung up. Mrs. Lizzie asked him to stop, but he was adamant. She shouted into the phone and called for Mr. Park Do-hek, but he couldn't hear her, so Jiang Zhonghua asked her to calm down and keep her cool. Mrs. Lizzie was very angry and was preventing Jiang Zhonghua from driving, so he reminded her that there was a road ahead and asked her to let him go. Pak Do-hek watched the video featuring him and realized that who posted it just for the sake of gaining subscribers by focusing on his abilities. He was angry because the video was of him fighting with his brothers, which means someone might think wrong and think he was just taking everyone's life. Pak Do-hek decided not to join guilds, but now openly used dungeons to level up. Then he sent a message to all the guilds that his joining was no longer worth 100 billion, and he had reasons for it, so the amount would not decrease. He invited anyone interested to come at midnight to see his personal reasons for refusing to join guilds of any success. The head of the Zhongxiang Guild, Baek Eunho, spoke to his awakened daughter and asked her to be more modest and tactful towards others. His daughter Baek Do-hee replied that she only wore such clothes to be comfortable in the dungeons and win victories because there was nothing in her way. Then he showed her a mock-up of a prototype defensive suit that was armored and asked her opinion on such innovations. She replied that such armor protects much worse than her own, so she didn't like such a suit and didn't want to try them on. Baek Do-hee informed her father that this time she didn't want to sit on the sidelines, and she was very interested in that new awakened F rank who was Park Do-hee. She wanted to check out this Pak Do-hek after watching the video, but her father said that the awakened control reported that it was just a magician. She knew he wasn't an ordinary mage because mages usually developed in one specialization or water or fire, and this was different. Baek Eunho clarified with her if she thought he was worth that much money, and she said she wanted to check it out and find out about his actual capabilities. Baek Do-hee said that her intuition never failed, so she asked her father to give her the money to purchase Park Do-hek's right. Baek Eunho had mixed feelings and thought about how he hadn't seen his daughter so lively and interested in a long time. He thought it was an ordinary F-rank guy and no different from the other awakened ones, but asked if 10 billion would be enough for her. Baek Do-hee was very serious and asked for 200 billion, believing that this amount would be enough. The father did not want to argue with his daughter and told her that he would prepare everything, but asked her not to waste money and to always think before she did anything. Baek Do-hee was very happy that he let her take so much money and told him that she loved him very much for trusting her so much. At midnight in the Deus Market, Lee Yunso greeted the representatives of the various guilds who had arrived at the special auction by the appointed time. Master Lizzie was getting nervous because she realized that there were many guild representatives and therefore competition. Lee Yunso announced that today, here and now, they will be holding a slightly unusual auction that was different from previous ones in style. She invited awakened spellcaster Park Do-hek to the stage and announced that he would be today's auction item. Park Do-hek took the microphone from Lee Yun-so and introduced himself to the audience, giving his full name and not hiding himself as an F-rank awakened one. He said that unlike awakened mages, he did not need time to rest and accumulate mana, which was his key feature. One of the guild representatives said that no one had ever been able to use magic without wasting mana, so he didn't want to believe in such tales. So asked him to confess that the video was edited and he was a common cheat, otherwise he promised to use his force and prove his point. Then Park Do-hek activated the shield spell and armor spell and placed a magical shield over his opponent to block a possible attack. The other guild members were very surprised that he was able to cast 2 spells so quickly, without delay or time to accumulate mana. Park Do-hek asked the audience if they had noticed that his speed was very different from the others, and that no one had ever seen such a thing with the awakened before. He decided to clarify if the audience was satisfied, but they all started saying that these were the simplest spells, but they wouldn't work in an attack. Park Do-hek replied that he assumed they wouldn't believe him so easily, so he prepared to demonstrate his full strength. He informed them that he was ready to demonstrate his skills on his assistant, which he had created himself and which was a training robot. Baek Do-hee raised her hand and asked if she could help him in the demonstration, which surprised Park Do-hek, who didn't expect this turn of events. She reported that she had come with a Chongsong guild tank, who was much more skilled than his dummy and was a stronger opponent for him. Park Do-hek explained that magic in normal mages takes time, so while they are weaving spells, they can't move, but he could be on the move. In this regard, to avoid monster attacks, they used tanks to protect them at the time of the spell, and Miseonmi was a tank of the Jongseon Guild. Park Do-hek explained that his specialty was that his spells worked immediately and he could move around without needing a tank. The attack power did not need to be accumulated, but was higher than the usual attacks of ordinary mages among the awakened of any rank and level of ability. So he finished his presentation by summarizing and explaining what his specialty of the awakened one was and was ready to begin the demonstration. Miseonmi was a tank belonging to the Jongseon Guild, and to take her to battle you had to pay a lot of money because such tanks were rare. Park Do-hek asked her if she was sure she could handle it, and she said that he didn't have to worry about her because she was very resilient. Examining the assistant, Miseonmi said she was sure she could do much better because she was alive and strong, awakened by the tanker. Besides, she wanted to personally feel the power of his spells to see if he was honest and to appreciate the true abilities of the awakened Park Do-hek. Miseonmi addressed the audience and said that she works in the Jongseon Guild and then showed off her characteristics to everyone. Master Lizzie thought that with Miseonmi's help, she would be able to make a fair assessment of Park Do-hek's worth and strength because Miseonmi was strong enough. Miseonmi's physical defense at rest was 101, and her magical defense corresponded to 155, which was high. Master Lizzie realized that in the state of battle, Miseonmi's stats could increase several times, which meant that they would appreciate Do-hek's true abilities. Park Do-hek understood that he had a chance to test his magic on a specialized tank, and he was ready to show all his power. Miseonmi put up a magic shield and said that she was ready for his attacks and asked him to start because she was confident in her strength and skills. Park Do-hek put up a magic shield around the stage to protect the audience from possible random displays of attacks from his side. At first, he used the Harmony of Pole Coherence magic and released 5 magic projectiles at once, which was a great rarity. Miseonmi thought about the fact that each of the blows were incredibly powerful, and he had fired 5 projectiles at once, and she hadn't encountered such a thing in the dungeons. Without waiting for it to finish, he cast a fireworks spell on his fingertips and activated Flaming Palms, which was different from his previous skills. The audience watched and were surprised that he used such devastating attacks, but didn't spend time weaving spells, which was very strange. Miseonmi's first defense was shattered after such an attack, and she was surprised by it because it had never happened to her before. Baek Do-hee realized that Miseonmi was one of the best among the rank D awakened ones, and therefore perfect for her purposes. With only 2 attacks, Park Do-hek managed to destroy her shield and continue attacking, which was admirable for his abilities and skills. Miseonmi asked Park Do-hek if he could continue his attacks, and he was surprised by the question because he didn't need to rest. Guild Tank Shansen reported that she didn't feel anything and asked him to show everything he was capable of to really evaluate his skills. Miseonmi was very curious to see and appreciate all the skills of an awakened rank F mage who used both fire and water elements. Baek Jochi understood that Ani never recognized other mages, which meant if they got Park Do-hek, she could have a great team. Park Do-hek replied to Miseonmi that he understood her and said that there would be no more games, so he activated several spells at once. The attack was so strong that even the magical shield protecting the audience gave a crack and was destroyed, to the surprise of all the guild representatives. The guild representatives were all watching closely and wanted to assess the extent of the damage to Chanson's best tank. Misonmi was injured and fell to the floor trying to regain consciousness and understand how this happened and how the awakened newcomer had so much strength and skill. Pak Do-hek apologized to her and said he didn't intend to attack her so hard because he saw that he managed to injure her. Misonmi said it was an honor for her to be injured after such a long time, which means there will be motivation to train and improve. Then Pak Do-hek thanked her for her help and held out his hands to help her stand up because he had indeed done quite a bit of damage to her. She, accepting the help, said that it would be great to see him once again in action, or better yet, take part in a battle with monsters together. After shaking hands, they decided to end the demonstration of Pak Do-hek's skills so that the audience could appreciate him. After that, he said that he would like to put forward his personal condition and watch the reaction of the guild representatives to understand the current situation. He said that he did not want to join any guilds, but would like to sign a contract as a partner to go down into the dungeons. One of the guild representatives didn't understand why they would pay so much money if he wasn't going to join the guild, because then there would be no benefit. Pak Do-hek did not argue and replied that it is only their choice, so he will not change his set final condition for today. The guild representative didn't understand why he was boasting such simple skills and left the Dios Mart room together with Min Song-yul. The other guilds also didn't want to buy a partera for 100 billion won, thinking it was too expensive, so they left the auction hall. Pak Do-hek was glad that there were only 2 representatives left from the 2 guilds, which meant that he would now be able to show off something else he had been hiding. Master Lizzie asked him why they would spend so much money on a regular guild partner since it wasn't cost-effective. Pak Do-hek showed off his mini helper drone, saying he's not happy with the idea of making money just from a contract, and he's a mechanic. The representatives of the Flower Guild couldn't believe that he could still make such items, which meant that he was a double awakened one. Master Lizzie said she was willing to pay 100 billion and sign a 5-year contract because their guild needed him. Baek Do-hee replied that she was willing to pay 150 billion and would offer 1.5 times more than the Flower Guild, so she was willing to do anything. Pak Do-hek signed on as a mercenary with the Chanson Guild and was all over the news reports that he broke the record for monetary reward. Park Do-hyuk flipped through the news feed and didn't understand why the news was spreading so quickly, since it had only been one day. When he received the messages from his parents, he realized that he had not informed them because he was afraid that they might take it badly, because it was dangerous to be awakened. But his mom would send him messages telling him to be careful and cautious and not make her cry and worry about his life. During the break, Park Do-hek collected some more relics, such as an old prayer notebook and marathoner Kim Young-jo's unique level shoes. Looking at his stats, he realized that he already matched his rank and decided to learn spells, while unique and rare relics were plentiful. He came to the Chanson Guild building and saw many judgmental looks, because they didn't understand who he was to cost so much. The other guild members didn't understand why the master had accepted a newcomer into the team as a partner and paid so much money. When he approached the reception desk, he apologized and said that he had come to meet with the guild master and was asked to wait a few seconds. Jong Min-chul approached him from behind and asked if it was the rookie Park Do-hyuk, who was worth a whole 150 billion won in front of him. The other members of the Jongshong Guild were whispering, curious about the newcomer's initiation rite, and Park Do-hek could hear their conversation. Park Do-hek heard their speeches and saw Jong Min-chul extend his hand and greet him, which means Do-hek needs to be careful with him today. Park Do-hek happily responded to the handshake and extended his hand in response to Jong Min-chul's actions without showing any sign of being ready for a possible attack. Sherry Minchul used force and his hands started to get very hot at the moment of shaking hands, but Park Do-hek was not going to give up. He activated his sword and armor, and his opponent didn't understand why he didn't react at all to the fire handshake that dealt great damage. Park Do-hek bent down to him and asked if that was all his power, and asked him to show more, not the kind of lowly magic that was hard to feel. Then Jong Mikul didn't want to lose to the newcomer and used all his strength, transferring it through a handshake and confidently looking at Park Do-hek's reaction. The members of the Jongshong Guild who were watching thought that this was already too strong for a newcomer's initiation rite, since he was not a monster, but an awakened one. At the same time, they couldn't understand why there was absolutely no emotion on Park Do-hek's face, as if he felt nothing. Jong Mikul was very angry and frustrated that he couldn't break through the F-rank rookie's defense and didn't understand how this was possible. Park Do-hek only laughed at him, saying that this rite of passage was absolutely worthless because it was weak and low. Jung Mikol lost his temper and said he would do anything to make the newcomer regret his words and take them back because he is a nobody here. With every second, he was building up the power of his attack and looked closely at Pak Do-hek's reaction, not understanding why there was no reaction. The guild members realized that this was already too much and wanted to call a master or chapter leader to help subdue the opponents and help. But they were surprised that Pak Do-hek stood absolutely calm and showed no emotion, considering that they were well acquainted with Jung Mikol's strength. And Jung Mikol was screaming in pain and internal rage that overwhelmed him because he could not cope with the newcomer in front of everyone. Jung Mikol could not withstand the attack and fell to the floor unconscious in front of everyone, thus making everyone misunderstand Do-hek's true strength. At that moment, the master came in and said that she had just returned from the dungeon and didn't understand what they were doing here. She sighed and asked to take care of Jung Mikol's manners, thinking that she had poorly taught him the manners and etiquette of dealing with newly awakened recruits. Pak Do-hek was surprised that the guild trained and dealt with everyone personally, as this usually only happened within the army. Master Pak Do-hee turned to Pak Do-hek and informed him that they could go to the negotiation and were already waiting for him in the negotiation room. He thought about the fact that they came just when he had demonstrated his power in front of everyone and thought it was on purpose. On the other hand, he couldn't believe his own thoughts and thought he'd made it up for himself by agreeing to follow the master. Then he followed Master Pak Do-hee and arrived at Guildmaster Jung Sung's office, where he sat comfortably on a leather chair. After looking around the office, he realized that it was more like a room and decided to ask the master about it because it was strange to him. She replied that this office was almost like home to her, so everything looked that way, and was surprised he wasn't busy spending contract money. Pak Do-hek replied that spending money was not his intended priority. He planned to gain access to a special dungeon for development. The master replied that they owned a goblin mechanic dungeon and clarified if he had heard of such a thing. After looking over the list, the dungeon master reported that a rank E dungeon with a goblin engineer as the boss was owned by the guild. She then presented him with a list of dungeons of Chanson's property and informed him that his growth was automatically their guild's growth as well. Carefully reading the description of Pak Do-hek, realized that the dungeon was exactly the same as the one in his game, and therefore the special scheme was there. Master Pak Do-hee reported that this dungeon was under their control, so she asked him for a favor in return. Pak Do-hek clarified what she meant, and the master replied that she would like to go there with him. Tank Mi-sonmi practiced in the underground training room and honed her skills. Teacher Park Geet noticed that Mi-sonmi had been practicing since the morning and asked if she was tired. She asked who he was holding on his shoulder and what happened up there since he was out of uniform. Pak Gita replied that the master saw him in the lobby when he clashed with Pak Do-hek. Mi-sonmi clarified if it was true that he had received the contract payment of 150 billion, and the teacher confirmed the information. Teacher asked what Sonmi thought of him since she blocked his attack at the auction, and Sonmi replied that it was the first time she was injured. And Mi-sonmi added that it was the first time she had so much fun because she had never been injured in such a long time. Chongsong Guild Tank Mi-sonmi said that she would like to battle him normally once more. The teacher was glad that she had finally found a worthy ranger from what she had trained so hard for. He asked why she always talked like she was in the military, and she said it was her habit since she grew up in a military family. Pak Gita said that he would try to keep her place and unite them for guild purposes, and asked her not to train so much and for so long. At 6 in the morning, Pak Do-hek met with the master, not expecting to go raiding so early as the new awakened one. She said she had invited porters, and in this case, only his availability was expected. He realized that usually the porters were the people who removed the lifeless bodies, but here they were also the awakened ones. The bearers knew that this was some sort of training for newcomers to learn what dungeons were like. Pak Do-hek asked if he could go in, and the master asked if he was sure he could do it alone. He replied that he was sure he wouldn't lose his life, and she asked if he was being arrogant. Then Pak Do-hek said his arrogance was based on precise and numerous calculations. He was very excited since this was his first dungeon, and he was purposefully going into it alone. The energy of the dungeon enveloped him, and the master informed him that he could pass forward. Going inside with him, she informed him that the structure of dungeons was always different, and this one was like a forest, and she didn't see anything unusual. Master Pak Do-hee reminded him that she would just be watching from behind so he could show her his full power. He didn't understand where he was going because on one side was a deep forest and on the other side was a manicured meadow with flowers. He activated his shield and armor and went into the forest because he thought that the goblins with intelligence in the meadow had set traps. Pak Do-hek carefully took step by step, moving deeper into the forest, and felt the attack of 3 missiles. The goblin mechanics looked at him and didn't understand why their attack didn't work. Pak Do-hek immediately engaged in battle with them and used various spells. He told them that he already knew where they were going to be, so he was well prepared. Analyzing the location of the goblins in the game, he searched for and immediately attacked them in reality. At some point, he began to search with his eyes for the rest of the goblins and surveyed the area around him. Then he saw that the goblin mechanics were attacking him from above, and he immediately applied a shield to repel the attack. He was very pleased with himself and his actions, realizing that the goblins would not be able to damage or harm him. He activated his flaming hands and used the spell to let a large and powerful flame stream upwards. His spell and technical abilities worked, so the goblins attacking him had one fate, and that was to quickly take their lives. He watched the lifeless bodies of the goblins fall and said that it was all very simple and nothing special. Realizing that there was no one left alive there, he decided to continue his search and went even deeper into the forest. Then he stopped and was extremely surprised at what he saw and couldn't even believe his eyes a little. In front of him was Boss Engineer Goblin's famous mechanical maze with many hidden traps. Master Pak Do-hee watched Pak Do-hek's actions and was very surprised by his abilities. She was sure that goblins with bazookas were bound to give him trouble, but he had dealt with it accurately and tactfully. She knew that normally awakened mages of his level had an accuracy of about 35%, and he had 100%. It seemed strange to the master that he had gotten all these abilities in just 1 month, and she couldn't even believe it. The master realized that ahead was a mechanical maze with many traps in the form of wasps, vampires' sharp saws, and other. She didn't understand why he had suddenly stopped. Did he get scared and decide to give up? But Pak Do-hek only took out his drone that he had demonstrated at the auction and activated it. Seeing the drone start up and take off, she couldn't believe it was functioning in the dungeon. Pak Do-hee didn't understand what was going on because no human product could work in the dungeons. The mini-drones gave him a full view of the maze with traps, and he made the decision to attack the goblins to earn experience points. He realized that with the help of his drones, he couldn't get lost in the maze, much less trapped. So he confidently entered the mechanical maze and turned toward the first cluster of goblin soldiers. Seeing him, the goblin commander shouted to attack, and they all rushed into battle. The goblins saw Pak Do-hek fly up and prepared to aim at him like a live target. Firing, they hit the target, but didn't realize why there was a picture in front of them and not a real enemy. Pak Do-hek said he used an illusion spell and asked the goblins how they felt about the illusion attack. Then, he decided to combine the magic shield spell along with the flaming hands. And in such a way, he passed through the goblins, attacking them all at once, and took their lives in a few seconds. After going through them, he received a message from the system that his level had been raised and was very happy about it. The master watching him from behind was very pleased because she thought he would repeat his techniques, and he was able to corner the goblins in their own labyrinth and then simply take their lives. She examined him carefully and realized that she herself was an awakened one from the rank and could not attack and defend at the same time like him. Plus, he also had operational drones, and the master realized that 150 billion was a great investment. Pak Do-hek approached the entrance to the boss room and asked the master if she would go inside there with him. Looking in, he quickly assessed the surroundings and saw that there were loaded cannons on either side of the room. And in the very center among the cannons was the Goblin Lord, who was the boss. He assumed the ruby in his forehead was directly connected to the cannons around him. Pak Do-hek knew he couldn't withstand the attack of the cannons with only his armor and shield, but he knew that the reload time of the cannons was a minute. Realizing that this would be enough time for him, he activated the harmony spell of pole coherence magic. And with the help of mini-drones, he released a large number of powerful magic projectiles. The Goblin Lord easily repelled his attack and immediately got into the armored vehicle, activating it with an emerald. Pak Do-hek examined the cannons that were around him and realized that it was a lot of goblins in special armor. The Goblin Lord ordered them to go out and attack the enemy as quickly as possible. Pak Do-hek, seeing many goblins and robotic monsters, assessed the situation around him. He was absolutely calm and did not feel the slightest bit of fear, for he knew that his calculations were correct. So he decided to attack one of the robots with a magic projectile, and he managed to penetrate the defense, destroying it. Then he concluded that such a spell would be more than enough to deal with the servants of the Goblin Lord. Pak Do-hek was puzzled that in fact, the structure, although injured, the robot continued to move towards him and attack. Seeing that the Dwarf Lord in his car was ready to give him a powerful attack, he stepped back a bit, and immediately activated the shield and magic projectile with the help of the harmony spell of pole coherence magic. With the help of 2 mini-drone assistants, he activated several magic projectiles towards the Goblin Lord. Pak Do-hek realized that it was not easy for him, but he was confident to win this battle. He He used the magic projectile once more, and time after time, he attacked without letting the enemy come to his senses. Then he noticed that while he was attacking the Lord, another goblin robot tried to attack him, but Pak Do-hek managed to dodge. And after buying some time, he used the spell again and released 5 magic projectiles at once. With this technique and the power of the spell, he was able to strip the robot of its head. Pak Do-hek was very pleased that he was able to win this battle. The Goblin Lord was wounded in one eye, but he was angry that his creation in the form of a robot had been defeated. Then he released a fiery projectile from a large cannon that was aimed directly at the enemy. Pak Do-hek did not expect this type of attack and was confused for a few seconds. Lord Goblin's attack was so powerful that it was able to penetrate and break his magic shield. Pak Do-hek understood that his business would be bad if he didn't already have his armor, and realized that the cannons were almost fully loaded. Therefore, he didn't have much time and made the decision to hurry up. He planned to seize the Goblin Lord's emerald, but 2 of his robot servants stood in front of him. He realized he had too little time to attack them first, and decided to go through them. He applied an illusion spell, and the robots mistook it for reality, so they started attacking the illusion. Pak Do-hek saw that the cannons had already loaded, and together with the Goblin Lord, released a powerful attack towards him. Then, leaning on the mini-drone, he flew up, and found himself above the powerful magic wave of the goblins. The Goblin Lord didn't understand how such a thing was possible, and Pak Do-hek applied fireworks to his fingertips, activating the flaming palm. Therefore, he managed to hit the Goblin boss from above with a powerful fire attack, thus evading its attack. Having completed his attack, Pak Do-hek was already beginning to taste the sweet taste of victory and was proud of himself. However, he felt the Goblin boss's hands on his neck and didn't understand how such a thing was possible. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the cannons were already fully loaded and were about to make an attack on him. Master Baek Do-hee was horrified by this development and thought about how exactly she should handle the situation. Pak Do-hek was confused by this development and decided to gather himself for further attack. The master began to activate her powers because she didn't want to let her guild partner's life be taken away in the first fight, but decided to stop her attack seeing that Pak Do-hek was up to something and was about to use a spell. She saw him fingering the magical heart and applying the sweet whisper spell of seduction. Pak Do-hek cast a spell of enchantment, and everything around him turned pink, leaving everyone confused. Lord Goblin was affected by this spell and felt an overwhelming desire. Pak Do-hek felt the Goblin boss unclasp his hands from his neck and was glad to see that the spell had worked. At that moment, all the cannons made an attack and hit all the Goblin robots passing by Pak Do-hek. He himself was very surprised at the way things were happening and from the effects of his spell. Master Baek Do-hee, watching, was extremely surprised that the Goblin Lord had protected him and destroyed his own servants. Pak Do-hek was under one of the robots that was completely out of commission after being attacked by multiple cannons. The master ran to him asking if he was okay and how he was feeling. Getting out from under the rubble, Pak Do-hek exhaled and reported that it was dangerous. He was rather surprised that the boss of the Goblin Lord turned out to be such a tough nut to crack. He was sure that he would manage to finish the battle with his flaming hands, but yet he survived after such a powerful attack. Shaking off the dust, Pak Do-hek reported that it was over as he had expected, so he was glad. The system gave out window after window with a message that his level had been raised, thus he had reached Mage level 20. He was surprised that he got so much experience and thought it was because he took the life of the boss alone. Master Baek Do-hee said that she had a lot of questions about the last spell, but for now she decided to leave, giving him time to sort through the items. She reported that today's raid proved to her that he was worth so much, and she wanted to continue working with him. After these words, the master left the dungeon and left Pak Do-hek alone with his thoughts and the dropped items. He was glad that he had gotten the golem schematics he so wanted to get in the second magic level items. 3 days later, he came to the Chonson Guild's underground training hall. He had asked his teacher to set the robot's power to the maximum level and was sure he could handle it. The teacher said that at maximum level, the robots would attack as soon as they saw the target, so he asked him to be careful. Before he could start the spell, he felt Master Baek Do-hee coming up behind him. She asked what he was up to this time, since they had left the dungeon not long ago. Pak Do-hek looked at her and said that he had an offer for her that she couldn't refuse. She asked it was something like those drones he had demonstrated last time. The teacher yelled that the robot setup was complete and it was dangerous, so yelled for them to be more careful. The robots began to look around the room and immediately identified their targets in the form of Pak Do-hek and Baek Do-hee. Pak Do-hek then told her not to react to the attacks and ordered his new invention to rise. Golem Akron listened to his master's order and immediately stood up, assessing the situation and the number of enemies. Without letting the robots activate their attack, Akron immediately dealt them all a crushing blow and destroyed them. Master Baek Dohee was very surprised at such a powerful golem and realized that one had handled several training robots at maximum level. Assessing the capabilities of the robot and its benefits of use in the Chansong Guild, she asked if he planned to sell it. Pak Do-hek merely waved his hands and said that he had created this golem for his own personal use. He explained that he only brought it to the training ground to test it out before going down into the dungeon. He called out to Akron and the golem turned its head toward him to report that Akron was answering. Pak Do-hek asked him to show the master how he would deal with the rest of the robots, and Akron replied that he understood him and accepted the task. Then Akron used the flaming hand spell without delay and launched a robotic attack at the enemy. A few seconds later, Akron stood all alone amongst all the robots that had gone out of commission. Guildmaster Chanson was very surprised to see what was happening and glared at the golem. She apologized, realizing that she was too surprised because she had never met golems like this before. Pak Do-hek was very pleased with the power of his invention and replied that he understood her, for this was the first time she had seen his Akron. The guildmaster asked that if he wasn't going to sell this golem, then what did he bring for sale? Pak Do-hek started pulling out items and said he was going to realize an ice explosive with a surprise and more. And also he was planning to realize a blinding explosive, and the master asked him to wait. Park Do-hyuk smiled and paused his story, while Guildmaster Jung Seon looked at him intently, then asked what kind of space it was, from where he easily pulled out explosives of various formats. He spread his hands and said that he had just somehow gotten this ability and didn't know anything about it. The guild master realized that only ranked awakened ones could use interdimensional ability. Pak Do-hek, an awakened F ranker, said that he must have been lucky to have such an ability. The master reported that he had just demonstrated a characteristic that surpassed the skills of his rank. But Pak Do-hek was completely calm and said that apparently that was his specialty. He asked them now to open the doors of the hall, and those seated were a little confused. Pak Do-hek said that it is much easier to show what these explosives can do than to explain them at length. For starters, he used the biggest giant thing with explosives. His throw was very accurate, and the explosive device flew precisely on target at the training robot. Once it hit its intended target, it detonated, and the explosive spread out, filling the training room. The teacher realized that it was an incredible force that made the walls covered with space stones simply melt, and they needed to lower the temperature. Pak Do-hek continued to remain calm and announced that the second in line would be an ice blast. All the walls around after the explosion were covered with ice that lasted for 10 seconds and then had to disappear. Master Baek Do-hee liked these devices very much and asked him to finally demonstrate the last device. Pak Do-hek recalled that the last one was blinding, so he handed the master black glasses and asked him to put them on. Putting on his glasses, Guildmaster Chanson reported that he had prepared well for the demonstration. Then Pak Do-hek threw the last blinding explosive to activate it. Pak Do-hek covered his eyes with his hands at the moment of detonation, and the guildmaster was surprised that his devices had performed so well. Then, taking off her glasses, she reported that all three devices were quite useful, and she was interested in the price of producing them. Pak Do-hek replied that it was a secret, but he planned to sell them to the guild for 6 million and the rest for 10 million. Master Baek Do-hee realized that such devices could be used not only in dungeons, but also in other places at the time of the outbreak. Pak Do-hek replied that he considered such a price quite low compared to the cost of human life. Then the guildmaster turned to Mr. Do-hek and said that she would like to make him an offer, and he specified what the terms would be. She informed him that if he would only sell them to her guild, they would be willing to pay 10 million apiece, and Do-hek agreed to the terms. The next day, Master Lizzie of the Flower Guild was preparing to descend into the dungeon, but her deputy entered the room. He reported that they were in serious trouble because the Chanson Guild added 30% on the stock exchange. Master Lizzie realized that the Chanson Guild, thanks to their exclusive partner, had started selling devices that could be used in dungeons. She recalled seeing Park Do-hek demonstrating his devices at the auction and realized she had to have it despite the price. Her deputy said his contract expires in 3 years, and then they can buy it. Manhwa saw Master Lizzie start to get very angry, and her anger was on the verge of rage. The guild workers heard the master attacking Manhwa and realized that they were separated because of the news about the Jongsong Guild. Master Lizzie told him to think before he spoke, because a novice F rank awakened was worth 150 billion back then. Accordingly, in 3 years, he will become even more powerful, and his price will increase several times. Master Lizzie was going to negotiate with Jung Seon and asked Manhwa to start packing and follow along with her. Chanson Guild managers in the sales department did not have time to take and place orders for devices from Pak Do-hek many were contracting. They wondered if they had a monopoly rights agreement and how many copies were available. Master Pak Do-hee was looking over the top at the first day of sales and was delighted to have so many customers. She recalled how Plum Blossom and Chansung had become rivals 2 years ago because of exclusive rights to some dungeons. It was at that time that Master Lizzie started spreading dirty rumors about the Zhongshang Guild and Master Pak Do-hee. In doing so, she managed to gain exclusive rights to the Namni dungeon, and the bad reputation has haunted Chansung to this day. Pak Do-hee understood Master Lizzie's feelings and goals, and understood why she had acted the way she did then. But there was no way she wanted to miss the opportunity to see Master Lizzie's face today. Seeing her and Zhonghua downstairs, she suggested that her assistant go downstairs and find out the purpose of their visit. Master Lizzie was worried so much that she was getting cold, but Zhonghua confirmed that it wasn't chilly. Pak Do-hee immediately saw Master Lizzie and Zhonghua in the crowd, so she walked over to them and greeted them. She asked why she didn't give advance notice of her visit, then she would have met her right away. Master Lizzie was not much for talking to her and asked what she was doing here since they were in the sales department. Pak Do-hek explained that today was the first day of sales for Pak Do-hek devices, and she couldn't miss such an important day for their guild. Master Lizzie smiled and said she was just looking for her to discuss a topic. Pak Do-hee suggested she move to a separate reception area to get away from the crowd and talk quietly. Two masters of different guilds didn't have the warmest feelings for each other, but had to keep their cool. Pak Do-hek was making devices and watching from the monitors, thinking that he would not want to be there. He heard the assistant enter the room, bringing the crystals and asking him to put them near him, explaining that he couldn't move while he was creating. When he saw the assistant approaching him, he was greatly surprised that it was Misunmi. Misunmi, who is a tank of the Zhongxion Guild, said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He asked how she got here, and Misunmi replied that she was looking for him, and the master told him where he was. Pak Do-hyuk then decided to ask why exactly Misunmi was looking for him, and what she wanted. Misunmi had a belligerent attitude, and asked Pak Do-hek to fight her one more time. Pak Do-hek was very surprised at such a strange request, and sweat broke out on his face. Misunmi explained that last time she had only held back his attack, but this time she wanted to fight him one-on-one. She explained that that was why she had asked him for such a strange favor. Having finished making the device, Pak Do-hek informed her that he had agreed to her proposal. Misunmi expressed her great joy that Pak Do-hyuk did not refuse her and accepted her offer to repeat the battle. With a cheerful attitude, she said she would go to get ready, but Pak Do-hek asked her to wait for him because he had some work to do. Misunmi sat down on the chair beside him and said she would wait for him right here and now. Pak Do-hyuk asked a little nervously if she could come back later, but Misunmi said she wasn't going to leave. She also said that if he needed anything, she would be happy to bring it to him. Pak Do-hyuk looked at Misunmi carefully and realized that she wouldn't just leave. So, I told her I had already done enough for sales, and sitting around designing was very boring. So he smiled and said he was ready to go to battle with her right now, and looked at her. Tank Misunmi was overwhelmed with joyful emotions, and she replied that it was a great idea and was ready to go into battle. Pak Do-hek changed into the outfit Misunmi had brought him and fixed it on himself. She asked if he had put on all of Pak Do-hek's equipment and asked her what it was and what it was for. She explained that its protective gear adjusts to their characteristics and increases their endurance level. Depending on the health level, the suit will change to green, yellow, and red, and when it is disabled, it will mean the end of the match. Pak Do-hek was more surprised by the fact that one such suit cost a little over 25 billion. Misunmi explained that their master felt that it was better to have such an investment than to constantly see injured guild members. Pak Do-hek was uncomfortable fighting for nothing, since they had such an expensive item on them, and offered a bet. Misunmi was a little confused and clarified what kind of argument she was referring to. He assumed that if he won, she would become his personal tankard, and if she won, he would become her personal mage. Misunmi clarified how long the condition of their contract would last, and Pak Do-hyuk replied that it was only 3 months. He also added that the loser will work those 3 months without pay absolutely voluntarily and for free. He asked Misunmi if she was okay with such an argument, thinking it was fun enough. Their communication was interrupted by Master Pak Do-hee, informing them that these were rather interesting terms of argument. Puck said he thought she'd be busy with Master Lizzie for a long time because he'd seen them together in sales. The master replied that his inventions had enabled her to have a lot of fun with Master Lizzie, and thanked him for the opportunity. Misunmi went to the master and told him that she was an awakened D rank, and Pak Do-hek was an awakened F rank, and didn't need a uniform. Pak Do-hek replied that in that case, He would give up the fight he could well do without the uniform. Master asked Ani what she thought. Misanmi was a little angry and indicated that she was willing to fight him without concessions on her part. Misanmi told him that she would give it her best and show him all her skills. Pak Dohek replied that he was no longer as she had seen him at Deos Market during the auction. Guildmaster Bek Dohi announced that she would be present and said that they could start the battle. Misanmi realized that she had to defeat Park Dohek before he began to use his chain of spells. Park Dohek felt Misanmi's attack on him and realized that his legs were no longer obeying him. He realized that it was most likely her skill of provocation causing her limbs to move in a chaotic pattern. Then he activated the strong and resistant armor, then read the spell to activate the magic projectile. Misanmi applied the iron wall, and her defense was automatically increased to 50%. He understood that she was employing a fairly standard strategy for defense, using provocation along with an iron wall. He realized that he could break through her defenses with fire, but that wasn't the outcome he had planned. So he used a smoke screen on her to make her lose control of his movements. Misanmi immediately activated the mana locator that helped sense the user's mana for 3 minutes. Then, using the mana locator, she saw many dots around her that were in different places. Misanmi was amazed that Park Dohek had managed to use so many different spells already. Reflecting the attack, she realized that he had already used too much mana, which meant it was time to use a counterattack. He cast the spell of the other me inside me and activated the mirror image attack. She realized that there were many Pak Dohekam in front of her and didn't understand which one she should attack. Then he once again recited a spell of pole coherence and harmony magic, after which he activated a multitude of magic projectiles. Park Dohek managed to launch an attack from Misanmi's back, and he released several magic projectiles at once. Baek Do-hee realized that Sunmin's tank, their guild had trained with special diligence, which meant she wouldn't give up so easily. It was indeed true, and Misanmi, although she had changed the color of her costume to yellow, was ready for another attack. Reflecting Park Dohek's attack, Misanmi pushed him back and prepared to launch a counterattack. She canceled the iron wall and applied a fast wind that for 5 seconds increased her speed by 40%. Misanmi didn't want to waste a second of time and immediately started attacking Park Dohek with her magic rapier. Launching a series of attacks, she watched carefully and tried to gauge the enemy's condition and strength reserves. Master Baek Do-hee was pleased with how Sunmi Ani's performance had improved in the short time they had not seen each other. Then she saw that Misanmi's tank was beginning to become entangled in some kind of sticky and glowing thread. The master touched the glistening and sticky thing, realizing it was a magical web. Looking around the room, she realized that everything around her was in this magical web, which caused her to be confused. Misanmi was tangled so tightly in the magic web that she couldn't move at all anymore. Frozen in one position, she asked Mr. Park Dohek what it was. He replied that he set them while the smokescreen was working, so she didn't notice such a trap. He explained to her that he wasn't entirely sure of the degree of protection these suits offered, so he didn't want to hurt her and set up a web. Pak Dohek explained that he had moved closer, not because he had run out of mana, but because he wanted her to remove the iron wall. Misanmi smiled and said that she had lost in this battle, but she was definitely going to win next time. Park Dohek agreed with her, saying that they would definitely fight together again. Misanmi then asked to be released from the web all the more, since she had admitted defeat. Pak Dohek apologized to her, saying that he had completely forgotten while talking. Releasing her, they heard Master Baek Do-hee applauding them, saying that they both did a good job. She stepped closer to Park Dohek and declared him the winner, asking him to take care of Misanmi. He said he would do it gladly and would definitely take care of the tanker. In the White Lotus Guild office, the White Lotus Guild master was carefully looking out of the window and thinking over everything that was happening. An informant entered the office and reported that the hired deprivators had already arrived in the country. The White Lotus Guild master clarified whether they had presented her and them with guards, and the informant replied that they had done everything, and also reminded that the transaction was done through Ghost Ant, and therefore nothing will lead to it in such a case. Watching the news reports on her phone, the master realized that Pak Dohek was like the chicken that laid the golden eggs. Smashing the screen of the phone, she thought that since they didn't get it, no one would. The hired workers arrived at the airport and asked for information about the facility to be sent to them. Mr. Song said that they would return back as soon as they finished the task entrusted to them. They discussed that Pak Dohek was quite popular, which meant they had to locate him quickly, so they decided to split up. One of them thought that it was strange that the price was so high for an awakened rank F rookie. But Mr. Song only wanted to fulfill the order and go home after receiving the reward. Misanmi fought together with Mr. Park Dohek in the territory of one of the dungeons. She realized that Pak Do-hek was very strong and skillful in the use of his explosive devices. Sunmi had seen him in action and thought about what she realized all the while still sparring with him, seeing his true strength. Pak Do-hek turned to her and asked her to finish up here quickly because these guys were boring him and he was bored. Misanmi realized that with that kind of attack power, he didn't need a tank, and she felt like an ordinary mule carrier. She couldn't afford to be a tank, from which there was no help to the team, and thought how to find something she could help with. Park Do-hyuk saw Misanmi stop and asked her what she was thinking about. Turning around, Misanmi replied that she was just hanging out a bit and was surprised at his skills. Misanmi was surprised that his mini-drones as assistants worked even inside the dungeon. Park Do-hek replied that if they continued to take part in the battles together, she would see something else interesting. Pak Do-hek asked why it was still hard for her to readjust, and she spoke to him formally. He said there are a lot of people who have a hard time transitioning to normal speech, so he didn't rush her into it. He asked her to move more freely even though she was a tank. She didn't have to move with him in the same rhythm, the main thing was to be on the same wavelength. Misanmi was a little surprised at this development and said she understood him. Their conversation was interrupted by monsters that were getting closer to them and were ready to start the battle. Pak Do-hek informed his tank that the main monsters of this dungeon had finally come to them. He knew that trolls were huge and slow and had high regeneration, so they were very hard to defeat. Park Do-chan asked Sanmi to piss off the trolls, and she replied that she was afraid she wouldn't be able to last long. He said that for the time being, he would attack the troll shaman as the most important one. He knew that if goblins were accompanied by a troll shaman, they could be reborn as powerful berserkers. The trolls, along with the goblins, headed for the attack, and Pak Do-hek launched his mini-drones. After that, he summoned his creation Akron and ordered him to detect and eliminate all targets. Tank Misanmi looked at the Akron robot and didn't understand what it was or how it worked in the dungeon. Pak Do-hek announced that it was his golem Akron, and he was leaving him to help her for attacks. After which, he cast the spell Reality Beyond Sight and applied the invisibility technique. Misanmi was already surprised by his drone and golem, but to apply the invisibility that was only available to awakened a rank. As she fought, she realized that Pak Do-hek never ceased to amaze her, and she herself was still a long way from actually helping him. But Guild Tank Jong-sung was willing to try her best to support him. At this time, the mercenaries took the life of the guard who was watching the entrance to the dungeon. As they scouted the area, they managed to find traces of Pak Do-hek, and they didn't think it would be so easy. They realized that the porters would soon be arriving at the entrance, which meant they had to speed up. Entering the cave, they wanted to finish as quickly as possible and just leave Korea. While fighting with the golem, Misanmi wondered if Pak Do-hek would be able to get to the shaman unnoticed. There were so many monsters, and she was worried about whether he would be able to get through all of them. The goblin shaman was in full swing using his special techniques and magic spells. Pak Do-hek managed to pass through all the monsters, and he was already standing behind the shaman who had sensed him. Then the shaman took his staff and gathered all his energy reciting the Alohomore spell. Pak Do-hek was not confused and used the Whisper of Pain spell as soon as he became visible. With that, he activated a poison arrow that flew straight towards the shaman. The magical arrow went through the troll shaman's head, and Pak Do-hek was very pleased with what he had accomplished. The Chonsun Guild tank was actively fighting monsters at full strength, and was being helped a lot by the Akron Golem. Then she noticed that something strange was happening to the arm of one of the monsters, and wondered about it. On all sides, she was being attacked by goblins, trolls, and other monsters whose attacks she was trying to hold back. Pak Do-hek used his flaming palms and reduced the number of monsters around Misanmi, thus helping her. Then she turned around and realized that she was being assisted by Akron, who used and wielded the same spells. Akron looked at her and told her that he was following the master's orders, and then Misanmi thanked him for his good work. By this time, Pak Do-hek had also managed to join them and used a surprise wave spell in the form of a lightning discharge, then killed the remaining monsters, and they fell deprived of life, and the tank did not cease to marvel at his skills. Looking around at the situation, Pak Do-hek was glad that it was finally getting a little bit more difficult, otherwise he was bored. Misanmi noticed that it was different from their last fight and asked if it was because he was alone with the head. After the fight, he purchased 3 books from the Chonsun Vault in which he used a spell to find these 3 new spells. Then he turned to Misanmi and asked if she was ready to continue the battle. After looking around, Misanmi said that there didn't seem to be many monsters left, and Pak Do-hek suggested that she rest. After looking at Pak Do-hek, Misanmi replied that she wasn't that tired yet. Pak Do-hek smiled and said that only they can rest together while Akron does its work. But before they could speak, they felt 3 strangers come into the dungeon. Activating his assistant mini-drone, Pak Do-hek thought about the fact that they only wanted to rest as again some obstacles. Activating an invisibility spell, he launched a mini drone so they would get a view and realize who had come to them. After examining the three strangers, Pak Do-hek realized that these people did not belong to their Chonsun guild. He realized that the entrance was definitely guarded by people from Awakened Control and didn't understand who those people were. Then he turned to Sunmi and asked what to do in a situation where people had snuck into the dungeon without permission. She replied that they needed to see if they had permission, but in case they attacked, they had the right to take the lives of strangers. After analyzing the information he had received from Sunmi, Pak Do-hek decided that this was exactly what they would do. Sunmi and Pak Do-hek used various magic attacks to defeat the golem. Those watching them were surprised that Pak Do-hek was having such a hard time in a rank D dungeon, and saw that his attacks were very weak. Mr. Song was happy that they would get a lot of money for such an easy prey, but he didn't understand why such a simpleton was their target. Mr. Song decided to take the easy way out and had his assistants provoke a group of trolls to attack with a distraction. He wanted to attack while Pak Do-hek was running away from a group of trolls. Mr. Song ordered another assistant to make sure nothing strange happened. Pak Do-hyuk turned to Sunmi and asked her to take a break, but she said they should have enough strength to secure the victory. The strangers were very surprised that such a simple guy was worth 150 billion and saw a group of trolls already approaching them. 6 trolls and 9 goblins who had clearly seen the target were already rushing towards them ready to attack. Sunmi said that she sensed them approaching, and Pak Do-hyuk replied that they shouldn't have even moved in their direction. One of the hired men laughed and said that he could handle them even without engaging in battle. Mr. Song asked if he was sure of that. Preparing for a magical attack, he replied that it would be too easy for him to do so. He decided to attack the target and asked what to do with the girl. Applying a magic spell, he released about 10 blades that flew accurately at Pak Do-hek. Pak Do-hek was prepared for such a development and immediately used a shield spell that completely contained the attack. The wage earners were very surprised at such a skill of the awakened F rank. They didn't even notice Akron coming up behind them, who Pak Do-hek had ordered to attack right away. Mr. Song looked at Akron and didn't understand what kind of robot it was, so he immediately tried to attack it. At the master's orders, Akron grabbed Master Sun and made a dash at the goblins and trolls with him. Trying to come to their senses, they were lying on the ground and did not understand what it was and how to deal with the situation. Pak Do-hek moved closer to them and asked how it felt to be attacked like that. He was specifying what they were experiencing, after like rats trying to make an attack from the back. Mr. Song was very angry and stood up from the ground and immediately decided to attack the boy he thought was insolent. Pak Do-hek used the spark spell on his fingertips and activated his magical flaming hands. Sleep realized that his powers were completely different from when they had watched the fight with the trolls and realized that he had been hiding them from them. Sleep couldn't understand how Do-hek knew they were going to attack and how he had time to plan a trap for them. Sleep was so preoccupied with his thoughts that he didn't notice he was in the monster's arms. He was terrified and called for help from his helpers to help him get out. Watching what was happening, Pak Do-hek sensed that he had activated mana from behind him, which meant he was going to attack. Therefore, he was able to easily repel such a planned attack, and he used a spell. One of the assistants was very surprised and didn't understand how he felt it from behind. Raising his head, he realized that Pak Do-hek was about to activate 10 magic projectiles with a spell. After receiving multiple wounds, the hired man didn't understand how he managed to notice his attack. Then above his head, he saw the magical mini drone that was working in the dungeon and completely stopped realizing what was going on. Pak Do-hek informed him that they relied too much on their skills. Surrounded by a crowd of goblins and monsters, they realized they had finally played his plan. After a while, Guildmaster Jung Seon informed Pak Do-hek that the results of the investigation had come in. Baek Do-hee reported that those 3 were known personalities, and judging by the transaction, they were hired by Ghost Ant. Pak Do-hek heard about the Ghost Ant for the first time and asked who it was. She reported that it was an awakened one from China, but no one knew his real name, so everyone called him by his nickname. Pak Do-hek said he had never heard any news or rumors of such an awakened one. Baek Do-hee replied that Ghost Ant was a powerful awakened who took the lives of all the famous awakened. Pak Do-hek didn't understand why he then did everything through intermediaries, but the master replied that most likely someone had done it through him. Pak Do-hek asked what then Guildmaster Jung Seon's assumptions about the real customer were. Baek Do-hee said that it was most likely someone who was interested in hurting their guild and stopping them. Pak Do-hek replied that he thought it was someone from either the White Lotus or Plum Blossom Guild. Baek Do-hee said it was someone who thought that if it didn't go to them, it shouldn't go to anyone else. Pak Do-hek realized that the master most likely knew who had done it, so he decided to ask directly. Baek Do-hee said she wasn't 100% sure, so she'd rather not say anything to avoid difficulties later. She handed him a card with the number of a home repairman, and he asked what it was for. The master replied that it was unlikely that there would be only one attack, so she wanted to put guards and an alarm system in the house. Park Do-hek took. The card smiled and thanked Guildmaster Jongshong for his concern. He was going to leave because he still had things to do, and Baek Do-hee asked what kind of things he had planned. Pak Do-hek replied that he had received a quest to increase his rank to level E and didn't want to miss out on an important event for him. After a while, he arrived at Deus's tower for a quest and went inside. Inside was much brighter than he would have guessed, and in front of him was a large monitor with quest results. One of the caretakers called out to him and invited him to get in line because the quest for rank advancement was about to begin. Pak Do-hek clarified what the monitor was and why it had a random awakening rating on it. The caretaker explained that this is a summary of a successful rank advancement that is submitted to Awaken Management for skill evaluation. Pak Do-hek realized that if he set a new record, he would attract the attention of the Awakened Control and gain access to their archives. And once he has access to the archives, it will be much easier for him to identify the customer and assess the situation. One of the White Lotus Guild's awakened guild members laughed at Pak Do-hek because he wasn't wearing any equipment at all. Pak Do-hek replied that he always attacks from afar, so he doesn't worry about armor. The White Lotus Guild's awakened guild master continued to laugh, saying that he wouldn't be able to get out of the quest alive in this form. Pak Do-hek replied that, unlike him, he didn't like to waste money, which made the awakened man angry. Pointing at his breastplate, he asked to remember Pak Do-hek that he was from the White Lotus Guild. Pak Do-hek asked him to end this idle conversation and prove his words with his skills. The White Lotus Guild Awakened One was cursing that he didn't want to waste time on an Awakened One who didn't even belong to any guild. Pak Do-hek was very confident and said they would allow them to debate when they knew the results of the quest. Then they saw that the measurement door was opening and a reset of previous settings was taking place. The system reported that an Awakened compliant could pass through and begin the quest. The White Lotus Guild Awakened was warming up after leaving the quest and said that it was easy. He realized that he was a newcomer to the White Lotus Guild for 5 billion, and some guy in cheap clothes wasn't his equal. He realized that by feel, he had spent somewhere around 4 hours, which meant he was definitely third in the rankings. He could hear everyone running to the results board and wished they were jealous of his ranking. Then he saw that the leader of the result table was Pak Do-hek, with a time of only 59 minutes. He remembered that the Zhongshong Guild had paid 150 billion won for him. He was so much surprised that he even fell to his knees thinking that he was arguing with Pak Do-hek and didn't even recognize him. Then Pak Do-hek approached him and asked him how he felt about losing to a boy in a cheap outfit. The quest itself was that it was necessary to deprive monsters in the amount of 100 pieces with no time limit. Pak Do-hek immediately activated Akron, who was his personal robot golem. The golem robot, Akron, immediately used a spell and attacked the monsters with flaming hands. Other monsters, such as trolls and goblins, he fought with other spells. Pak Do-hek was surprised that one of the monsters was able to withstand Acorn's attack and watched what was happening. But Acorn was getting up after the attack and kept attacking the monsters and thus was able to withstand. After a little while, Pak Do-hek saw that the door was open, which meant that they had already managed to take the lives of 100 monsters. When he got home, he realized that the level of Akron and drones was not enough for the ogres and trolls, which meant that he should increase his alchemist level to strengthen the golem and drones, and also his skills. Then Pak Do-hek decided to change his profession from mage to alchemist, and opened his stats where he spent all the points he had accumulated. The system refreshed and changed his rank to level E and prompted him to choose a special spell. He realized that he was very lucky to choose a new special spell again, and he realized that he should choose a healing spell. He was glad of his choice because with this spell, he could handle it without a healer. There was a master in the White Lotus Guild's sleeping quarters, but her peace was disturbed. Mi Sunyul was surprised to see him because she hadn't seen Pak Do-hek since that meeting at the Deos Mart and didn't think he would visit her so early. White Lotus Guild Master Mi Sunyul said that she wanted to meet him herself. Pak Do-hek was surprised, and the master replied that she wanted to see the newcomer everyone was talking so much about. He informed her that he wasn't going to be spending much time here, so he wanted to get right to the point. The master replied that he didn't like foreplay either, so she asked him what kind of business he had decided to come to her for. He looked at her and questioned her directly why she was trying to take his life. Misonol pretended not to know what he was talking about and clarified exactly what he meant. Pak Do-hek was determined and said that he knew she had done it through the ghost ant. Mi Shun-yul continued to pretend she didn't understand and asked him what other ghost ant he was talking about. The White Lotus Guildmaster interjected every question from Pak Do-hek and looked very excited. Taking his hands in hers, she walked over to him and asked him what had happened and why he was accusing her. Pak Do-hek held out his hands and realized that White Lotus had long been known for its foul reputation, which meant it could not be trusted. He knew that Min Sung-gyul couldn't be trusted because she was famous for being willing to do anything for money. Pak Do-hek stepped away from her and replied that he was prepared for that answer, so he was only offering her two options. Min Sung-gyul leaned on her bed and continued to pretend she didn't know what he was talking about. Pak Do-hek settled back in his chair and put his leg over his foot and began to voice the first option. He said that if they gave him sufficient compensation, he would not grind his teeth on them and make enemies of them. Mi Sun-yul looked at him and wanted to answer, but Pak Do-hek interrupted her, saying he wasn't finished yet. Then he voiced a second option, that if they didn't give him anything, he would publicize the attempted attack. Mi Sung-gyul replied that whatever he said had nothing to do with her White Lotus Guild. Pak Do-hek said she was free to choose absolutely and started to get up from the chair. Lastly, he said she couldn't help but know who would get hurt first if he made it all public. Walking to the door to leave, he said he would pretend this conversation never happened. Min Sung-gyul jumped up from the bed and asked him to wait and not leave so easily. She asked how many billions he wanted for his silence and asked him to name his price. Pak Do-hek replied that 10 billion won would be enough for him to keep silent and remain neutral. The White Lotus Master didn't understand how he could ask for so much if he wasn't even sure it was her who did it. Pak Do-hek was calm and said that she had given herself away with her reaction, so he no longer had any doubts about her rightness. Min Sung-gyul thought for a few seconds and said that she agreed to their deal, but she warned him that if the truth came out, she'd take his life with her own hands. After receiving the 10 billion into his account, he left the White Lotus Guild building and approached his armored car. He received a notification on his phone where there was detailed information regarding beefing up the protection of his own home. Thinking back to his conversation with the White Lotus Guildmaster, he realized that the rumors about Min Sung-gyul were quite true. He doubted that this was the last attempt on her part to thwart him. Accordingly, when Ghost Ant learns of his failure, he will most likely send new hires. He realized that in order to prepare, he should have gotten much stronger. He was contacted by the Information Guild and finally provided the address of the new antique store he was looking for. He realized he hadn't gone on a treasure hunt in a while, so he decided to follow there to find some books. In a park near Isu Station, where an antique store was located, a man was sitting on a bench, who was looking up at the sky, very upset, and didn't understand what his problem was, and was thinking about his life. Shin Tae-poon thought that when he became a financial planner, his whole life would work out, but it didn't. He crumpled up his business card and realized that the result was not what he had expected. Shin Tae-poon was leafing through the group chat of the Awakened Ones, and was angry that one of them had gotten 10 million right after descending into the D-rank dungeon. He comforted himself with the only thought that it wasn't his fault for not becoming awakened at a time like this. His thoughts were interrupted by a vibration, and he didn't realize what was happening, but the ground beneath his feet vibrated violently. Turning around, he saw a hole in reality that, like a vortex, forced him along with the passers-by inside. Pak Do-hek was not far from the place, and realized that it was a flash, but some kind of strange one. Thinking back, he realized that he had never seen anywhere before that a flash could draw people in. He realized that since the flash was drawing in ordinary people and not the awakened one, they would be immediately taken away by the monsters. Pak Do-hek realized that he should hurry to help the ordinary people. As he got closer, he saw that there were other awakened Kim Jae-jung and Yoon Min-soo, who said that they had already reported the information to UP. As he came closer, he introduced himself and said that he was an awakened rank E and had come to their aid. The other revivalists were overjoyed and asked him to take his baton and go regulate the roadway. Pak Do-hek was terrified and did not understand what they were talking about because they had to go to the dungeon and urgently save people. They laughed at him, saying that it was better not to cause trouble by descending into a dungeon of unknown rank and go to regulate traffic. Pak Do-hek asked to keep his hands off of him and reminded him that in Chapter 1, Article 1 said that the awakened have a duty to protect the citizens. Kim Jae-jung asked him what made him think that E-rank could solve the whole situation by himself. Pak Do-hek used an instantaneous power infusion spell and pushed the other awakened one away to enter the dungeon. Shin Tae-poon didn't know where he was because he had just been in the park at Isu Station. Looking around, he realized that his leg was injured and he couldn't stand up in pain. He squinted in pain but couldn't get up, Then he continued to look around and he was getting scared. Behind one of the trees, Shin Tae-poon saw a large red monster that stared back at him intently. Seeing such a monster, he was horrified and cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he realized he couldn't move for fear and pain. The monster was very close by, and Shin Tae-poon gathered all his strength trying to stand up. He still fell because of the wound in his leg. He tried to crawl away from the monster and screamed loudly, hoping that at least someone would come to his aid. The monster had grabbed him and was about to swallow him, and all he could think about was that he never had time to help his parents. He closed his eyes and mentally asked God to save him if he existed and was willing to do anything. At this moment, a green magic beam flew between him and the monster, which diverted the monster's attention. Pak Do-hek took away one of the monster's paws and saved Shin Tae-poon by asking him how he was. He asked who he was, and Pak Do-hek said he was an awakened one and had come to save him. Shin Tae-poon shouted that the monster was already behind them, but Pak Do-hek was completely calm. He ordered his golem robot Akron to catch the monster by the tail and send it flying. Akron accepted his master's order and began to carry it out while Pak Do-hek only watched. Akron lifted the monster above his head and launched it upward as his master had instructed him. Pak Do-hek turned to Shin Tae-poon and said that there might be others who need help, so he asked him to hurry up. The awakened who were outside continued to guard the area and reported that everyone should evacuate immediately because it was dangerous. Lee Yun-so walked over to them along with her partner, and lifting the ribbon, they moved closer to the awakened ones. Kim yelled to them that the area was fenced off, which meant they had no right to just walk around. At that time, Choi Dae-ho, the deputy director of the Seoul Branch Awakened Management, introduced himself to them. Moving closer, Choi Dae-ho checked with them to see if they had checked the flash inside the dungeon. They reported that they were directing traffic near the outbreak, but one crazed awakened person had gotten inside the dungeon. Choi Dae-ho asked what they were doing while he made his way inside, and they said they were waiting for the UP to arrive because the monsters could come out. Then the deputy director asked if the monsters had appeared, and Kim said not at all. Choi Dae-ho was displeased that they had forgotten about the duties of the awakened and didn't go inside to rescue the civilians. He reminded them that the responsibility of the awakened is much higher than others in cases of emergency incidents. Lee Yun-so interrupted his conversation and said that it was probably time for them to enter the dungeon instead of wasting time here. Using a mini drone, Pak Do-hek scanned the area and found the last survivor. He immediately headed there and attacked the monster with a whisper of pain and a poison arrow. The attack worked, and the monster was rendered lifeless by the magic spell he used. But suddenly, Pak Do-hek felt a terrible headache and clutched at the pain. He thought it was likely that the constant use of spells caused headaches as a side effect. Pak Do-hek realized that he would have to suffer his headache because now he needed to help the civilians and save them. Looking around to assess the situation, he realized that the monsters were beginning to surround them. Then he cast a swamp spell from which there was no escape and shrouded everything around him in spider webs. He asked the civilian holding her in his arms to hold on a little longer, and she screamed that there was a monster behind them. Then Pak Do-hek applied a magical instantaneous burst of strength to escape faster. Then he activated the web magic spell again, and this time, the monster was caught in his ploy and couldn't move. Seeing that he didn't have much time while the monster was immobilized, he put the civilian in a safe place. And applying the Hellfire Incarnation spell, Pak Do-hek used a fireball. Lee Yun-so, along with Choi Dae-ho, went down into the dungeon and wanted to split up to find everyone faster. But Lee Yun-so saw a powerful stream of flames to one side and told the master to look. Choi Dae-ho carefully looked where Lee Yun-so was pointing and realized that that was where they were going. The flow of the fireball was so strong that they even covered their faces with their hands to avoid being hit. Looking around, the men of Awakened Control heard a stirring in the bushes and asked who was there. Upon seeing the robotic golem, they didn't understand what it was and carefully continued their observation. The civilians raised a wild wave of joy, seeing that they had finally seen the men from Control awakened. They ran to them and some cried on their knees with happiness and couldn't even believe they had been saved. Lee Yun-so and Choi Dae-ho looked at the golem and didn't understand what it was and who could create such a thing. Akron reported that the control link was confirmed by the civilian's reaction and he could return to his host. Lee Yun-so asked who was its owner and he replied that he was the private property of Pak Do-hek. Choi Dae-ho asked Yun-so if Pak Do-hek wasn't a magician, and she said that he was able to design explosive devices. The deputy director concluded that the database was incomplete because the awakened person had abilities that were not mentioned in the database. He ordered Lee Yun-so to get all the civilians out of here and she went to follow orders. Choi Dae-ho went in search of the other civilians and Pak Do-hek himself. Seeing the monster's lifeless body and the large stone funnel, the deputy director of Awakened Management stopped. He couldn't believe that Pa Dohek was able to burn a ranked sea monster with fire defense. Pak Dohek asked who he was, and the deputy director asked if there were any other survivors. He replied that he had saved the last civilian and was about to leave the dungeon. The deputy director of the Soul Office introduced himself and thanked him for his assistance. Already in the evening, all over the Deus Net, there was news of this outbreak and an interview with Chai, who said that this is what an awakened one should be like. In the interview, he said that Pak Dohek thought nothing of it and entered the dungeon with one goal in mind: to help and save civilians. Guildmaster Jongsong, watching the news, asked if that was what he had been doing all day, but Park Dohek replied that it was just a coincidence. He replied that he had some business that took longer than he had planned. He managed to get a lot of relics, and he upgraded his alchemist level to 9th, so he strengthened Akron. By doing so, he was able to add an instantaneous burst of power to Akron's functionality. The addition of the new formula was successful, and the Akron Golem became even stronger. So Pa Dohek gave orders to Akron to take care of him always and be there for him. The golem robot Akron replied that he would protect his master until the forfeiture of his life. Together with Misonmi, he went to the next dungeon, and she informed him that the monster was already nearby. Many monsters in armor were ready to attack them and take part in the battle. Activating the spell, Pak Dohek asked Sonmi to repeat what they had already done. Pak Dohek used the spell swamp impossible to get out of and activated the magic web. Misonmi enhanced the effects of the web with the activation of the rapier's magical properties. The Jongsong Misonmi Guild's tank was ready to attack and carefully assessed the situation at hand. Pak Dohek, the awakened 9th level alchemist, continued to use various spells. They realized that the shell trolls could not be attacked from the front, which meant they had to be approached from behind. So Misonmi diverted their attention to herself so that Park Dohyuk could approach them from the back. Park Dohek shouted to Sonmi that he was ready to launch an attack and asked if she was ready. Misonmi heard him and replied that she was ready so he could start. Pak Dohek used a fireball magic spell and attacked the trolls from the back. He was only thinking about whether Misonmi was okay and whether she was able to defend herself from his attack. At this time, Misonmi activated her defenses, sneaking through the magical flames from the fireballs. Seeing her, Park Dohek was very happy that Misonmi had made it through and was unharmed. Seeing the silhouette behind Misonmi, he shouted to her to be careful and warned her of the attack from behind. Misonmi was able to fend off a surprise attack from the monster, thanks to that. Pak Dohek was worried about her and yelled at her to get out of there, asking how she was feeling. Misonmi fell to the ground and covered herself with her shield, saying that she was perfectly fine. She realized that the monster in armor had gotten into a frenzy and asked Pak Dohek to be more careful. Pak Dohek watched the monster move towards him, ready to attack, while the awakened man wondered if he could do the damage in one blow. He decided to attack it with fire, but realized that there was a risk that one of the monsters would be able to block such an attack. Therefore, Pak Dohek decided to concentrate the lightning charge into a strike in hopes that it could thereby pierce through the armor. Along with the lightning concentration, he applied an instantaneous power infusion magic spell. Misonmi was too worried about him and was already running to help him. Park Dohyuk thought that it would be much better if Misonmi trusted his skills more. Pak Dohek succeeded. He was able to break through the monster's armor and take its life with such a powerful magic spell. Meanwhile, his personal assistant mini-drone continued to survey the dungeons, scanning all around. Seeing Park Dohyuk being treated, Misonmi said that what he just did was too dangerous. Pak Dohek was surprised and said he was more worried about her not getting hurt herself. Misonmi reminded him that she was a Chonson Guild tank, and minor injuries didn't matter to her. After looking at him carefully, Misonmi told Mr. Park Dohyuk that she was very worried about him. Saying this, she moved closer to him on emotion and leaned into him. He stroked her head and thanked Misonmi for being so thoughtful towards him. He explained to her that he wouldn't risk it. Unnecessarily, he had thought things through enough before attacking. Misonmi bowed her head and said that she was scared for a moment that she might lose such a good partner and apologized to him. Pak Dohek promised her to use safer methods next time. At this moment, the mini-drone flew towards them and mentally transmitted information to its master. He asked Misonmi to rest here for a while and said that he needed to step away for a while. He explained that he was leaving drones around the perimeter after the last attack, and they had spotted something suspicious. Misonmi wanted to go with him. Pak Dohek said that he would go alone, and if it was dangerous, he would return immediately, or they wouldn't have time to rest before the boss. Park Dohek said he was leaving a mini-drone with her so she could relax, and she agreed, asking him to be careful. Pak Dohek walked forward and saw the triangular cave in the dungeon, realizing he had come to the right place. As he looked around the room, he realized he hadn't seen this in his favorite D and F game. But I decided to go in because I realized this man-made structure couldn't just be there. Once inside, he was quickly moved to the road and didn't realize what had happened. Looking around, he realized that he was on a very high bridge that led to some kind of building. He looked carefully around him, but didn't realize where he was or what he had to prepare for. Just then, he turned around and saw that something was going on behind him and scrutinized carefully. He couldn't believe it, but in front of him was a man with shoulder-length gray hair and wearing wine-colored clothes. He called him Berhard, and the elder replied that he was the first to call him by name so confidently. Holding up a staff with a blue stone, he inquired how Pak Dohek knew his name so well. Pak Dohek didn't understand how the NPC from his game was suddenly here in front of him and talking. Then he replied that there was a game in their world where there was a character with the same name. Pak Dohek thought it was a dream, and Berhard said that many strangers said the same thing when they got here. The awakened, Yerang Pak Dohek, was very surprised by the word strangers. Berhard explained that this was a place to come through time and space, and that it was an examination arena in which he tested the potential of outsiders. Pak Dohek asked if any other foreigners had passed the exam, and Berhard replied that no one had passed yet. He reported that many suffered because the final assignment was always different, and asked if Pak Dohek was ready to take the test. This test allowed the one who passed to accept it with joy and modesty, and the one who lost to accept his defeat. Pak Dohek believed that no matter where he was, if he could raise his level, he should do so, so he agreed to take the test. The goal of the exam was very simple. You had to get to the top of the tower and stay alive. Along the way, there were many different traps and monsters that no one had ever seen before. At the very end, you have to pass the monster lions that guarded the tower very well. There were a total of 5 attempts to complete the quest, and each time Pak Dohek lost one of them. After the encounter with the large magical lion, he only had 1 attempt left to complete the quest already. He realized that this was quite a challenge, so after each lost attempt, he treated himself with a healer spell. He thought back to all his previous attempts and tried to figure out exactly how he should go about it. Resting a bit, he thought about the fact that feeling like a lion was chewing on him was too realistic. He realized that he already knew his way around traps and monsters, but here the magical black lions were on a completely different level. He realized that with his current skill level, he would not be able to defeat such strong and powerful lions. His thoughts were interrupted by Berhard, who came up to him and addressed him as a stranger. He asked him not to be afraid to try again, and Pak Dohek didn't understand him because he only had 1 more. He decided to clarify exactly what he meant, but Berhard said he couldn't give him an answer. Looking after the departing Berhard, Pak Dohek thought about his words and tried to understand what kind of attempts he was talking about. Warming up for his next attempt, he thought about the fact that perhaps there was another way to get to the tower. But as he looked off into the distance, he realized that the path in front of him was the same as the last time he had tried. He realized that the cliffs on the sides of the bridge had a direct path to taking his life, and therefore was not a way out. Pak Dohek decided to turn around and look around the entire area, all the way around. He was very surprised that there was a wall behind him and not a cliff, and thought about why it was there and what was behind it. He realized that this map was standard, and all paths, except that road, led to the forfeiture of life, so there had to be a cliff there, not a wall. Then he remembered a character from his favorite movie and decided to take a broader view of what was going on. Turning to face the wall and turning away from the tower, he informed Berhard that he had gone. He decided not to be afraid of trying again and applied an instantaneous burst of strength so his speed and reaction increased. Through the use of such a spell, Pak Dohek was able to get through the wall and destroy it. He saw the path to the tower again and realized Bernard didn't notice him, which meant he was in another dimension, and ran past him. Then he saw the magical lion in front of him and realized that he was able to run past the traps and monsters. Pak Dohek thought to himself that he could probably just run past the magical lions, but he saw that one of the black magic lions had spotted him and prepared to attack. Pak Dohek immediately activated the color deprivation spell in hopes that he could attack the magical lion. He managed to break through the wall of dimensions and passed by the magical huge black lion. Flying forward, he saw the message that he had passed Berhard's exam successfully. Opening his eyes, he was back on the road on the bridge, but Berhard said he had managed to pass the exam and had nothing to worry about. Berhard reported that he was the first to pass his exam, which required the lion's share of creativity and perseverance. Shaking his hand, Pak Dohek said he just looked around after his words, but Berhard replied that he said that to everyone. Berhard said that since he had passed the exam, he would give him a blessing and asked what their most prized relic was. Pak Dohek showed him his Ring of Faith and Light, which had a unique relic level and increased wisdom by 100%. Berhard said he would upgrade the ring, but now it can only belong to him and no one else. Pak Dohek asked how it would work, and Berhard replied that now he wouldn't have to cast spells out loud. Pak Dohek was very happy and said he would gladly accept such a gift and was already looking forward to using it. Then Berhard presented his staff with a blue stone on the end and activated magic that increased the level of the relic. Pak Dohek was very happy because he could see how Berhard's magic worked in reality. The Ring of Faith and Light gained legendary status thanks to Deus's magic and increased wisdom by 250%. Pak Dohek was overjoyed to have his first legendary ring in his hands. Berhard asked if he liked it, and he said he felt like a different person now. Berhard examined Pak Dohek carefully and said that he was happy for him, but now it was time for him to go back. Pak Dohek was grateful to him and upset, asking if they would ever see each other again. Berhard replied that perhaps the day would come when their worlds would merge and then they could meet again. Pak Dohek realized that he was so focused on the test that he didn't even have time to have a proper conversation with him. Berhard suddenly remembered that he didn't even know the young man's name, so he asked what his name was. Pak Dohek was pleasantly surprised by this gesture of attention, and smiling with joy introduced himself by his name. Returning him to his world, Berhard said goodbye and informed him that it was a pleasure to meet him. Pak Dohyuk found out from Mi Sonmi that he had only been gone for about 30 minutes, and she even started looking for him when he came out of the distorted place. Tank Mi Sonmi continued attacking the armor monster and replied that she was glad that he was okay. The Akron robot, seeing its master in one piece, began to help Mi Sonmi attack the monsters. At this moment, Mi Sonmi noticed that his robot golem started to look different and probably became stronger. Seeing that Sonmi wasn't doing well, Pak Dohek activated the magic projectile Flaming Hands and Poison Arrow to attack. He struck a magic blow so strong that nothing was left of the monster at all, and it was deprived of life. Mi Sonmi wondered if she had used the same attacks and defense techniques, but her strength was less. She could feel that he had gotten stronger and no longer cast spells out loud like he used to before the cave. Mi Sonmi wondered what had happened to him in 30 minutes, and Pak Dohyuk told her to move on. The next day at the Chanson building, he thought he had a great day, and Berhard gave him the legendary ring. Master Baek Dohi asked how he was doing, because according to Mi Sonmi's guild reports, he was already in the C+ rank dungeons. Pak Dohek replied that everything was fine, and Mi Sonmi was protecting him admirably by taking more damage. Guild Master Chanson informed him that she was practicing even on Sundays, and it would be better if she rested at least once in a while. Baek Dohi asked him to take care of the Jongseong Guild tank for her and make sure she rested occasionally. She explained that Sonmi looks strong because of the home situation, but she's a very sweet girl first and foremost. Pak Dohek was very grateful to her for allowing them to fight together in the dungeons. Afterward, Baek Dohi asked the awakened man why he had invited her and what he wanted to say. Pak Dohek said he wanted to sell one thing with it, because he couldn't do it himself, and held out the scroll. It was a spell recognizer, and the guildmaster had never seen one before, so she asked what it was. Pak Dohek explained that with this item, you can recognize the hidden capabilities of other items. He decided to demonstrate the effects of this scroll, but Master Baek Dohi stopped him. She suggested that he test the effects of the scroll on a more important object and pointed to her sword on the table. Baek Dohi had been using this white sword for years, so she was sure she knew all of its capabilities. Pak Dohek was pleased with this response and decided to show her the full power of the roll he had brought. He opened the roll and held it over the sword. Then the item was recognized successfully. Holding the silver sword of the guildmaster in his hands, he replied that everything was ready and asked her to look at it again. With slight disbelief, Master Baek Dohi took her sword in hand and decided to bare the blade to see what had changed. She was surprised to see that the sword had the ability to increase stamina by 55%, and Dohek replied that it was the power of the scroll. Pak Dohek realized that unlike in the game, in reality, few people knew how to find relics and use the recognizer spell. The guild leader was surprised because she had been awakened for over 10 years, and as the guild leader, she had met various awakened people. Baek Dohi thought about the fact that she had never met anyone like him among the awakened. Pak Dohek finished his demonstration and asked her what she thought of such a hidden ability recognizer. She asked him to give her some time to think and figure out the right thing to do. She realized that such a scroll was an indispensable item and was very valuable to any awakened and any guild. Baek Doho realized that only he could do that, so he decided to find out how many pieces he could create per day. Pak Dohek replied that about 120 pieces more than that is simply impossible to create in a day. He said he wanted the guild to have exclusive rights and a starting price of 20 million won per scroll. Accepting his terms, she informed him that if he would give them 10%, she was personally willing to handle the sales. Pak Dohek replied that her offer sounded good enough, so he agreed to make the scrolls on those terms. Guildmaster Baek Do-hee informed him that most likely this scroll was raising a big ruckus. Pak Dohek laughed and said he was excited about this development. 5 days later, the news of the scrolls spread around the world and changed the view of many relics, so the price went up a lot. The director of Awakened Management approached Mr. D-ho and clarified that it had only been 5 days since the scrolls had been published. He said that the starting price was 20 million and went up to 30 million won in 5 days. Daeho said he never thought one awakened man could bring so much to the table. He realized that when the news reached the other countries, they would act, which meant they had to make the first move. The director said that she had heard that Lee Yunso was personally acquainted with this awakened one. She asked him to contact her and arrange a meeting with Pak Dohek in person. Watching the news reports as expected, the influence of Pak Dohek was increasing. He realized that his influence was now increasing at a very high speed. As such, he wanted to start acting on a larger scale to make everyone aware of him. He understood that he needed to establish relationships with government organizations first, and at that moment, Lee Yunso came over. She asked how long he had been waiting for her, and Park Do-hek replied that he had just arrived, so he hadn't spent much time. Park Do-hek was very happy that the management itself had invited him, and then Lee Yunso asked if this was the first time he had been in this building. She reported that all dungeon and guild reports go through them, so they have no time to rest at all. She escorted him to the office of the Soul Awakened Management Branch and invited him to come through. She informed the director that it was Lee Yunso, along with Park Do-hek, and the director invited them to come through. Park Do-hek was very surprised when he saw the director of the Soul Branch of New Awakened Management. The principal apologized for calling him here since she should have met him in person, but there were too many eyes around. Cho Chanmi was the director of Awakened Management of the Soul Branch. Looking at them, Park Do-hek realized that the SS rank people in front of them were SS rank people, and the pressure was very high. They sat down at the negotiating table, and Park Do-hek suggested getting straight to the point. Cho Chang-mi announced that he will be the next rising star to represent South Korea. She explained to him that his attack defense and ability to craft special items showed that he was strong in more than one area. Park Do-hek looked at her and was surprised that they were planning to pressure him. He thought about the fact that he was going to make a deal with them anyway, but he didn't want to be an errand boy. Cho Chon-mi said that they planned to give him full support, including dungeon raids in other areas. Park Do-hek was glad that they were going to give him support and asked what was the reason for this decision on their part. They replied that their organization has always supported such awakened ones so that they would not be poached by other countries. Daeho reported that they had no ulterior motives on his account and were frank with him. After a little thought, Park Do-hek replied that he understood them and agreed to accept their support since they offered it. He wanted to say that he would wait for news from them, but he saw that something was happening outside the window. The office they were in began to shake, and no one realized what was happening. Park Do-hek was trying to keep calm as he assessed the situation and saw a red beam outside the window. The flash was very bright, and he asked the director and deputy director of Awakened Management to look out the window. Director Jo Chun-mi couldn't believe she was seeing this, and Park Do-hek asked if she knew what it was. Cho Chun-mi frowned and said that it was a rather strong, large-scale flare. They immediately got in the car and drove to the flash site, hearing on the news that 78 flares had opened at once. Park Do-hek clarified that he was not double C ranked, but was told that specialized translation was allowed in such a case. Lee Yunso replied that she will go with Mr. Park Do-hek, and he and the branch director will go to another flash. The civilians were surrounded by mantis-like monsters and couldn't handle their attacks. At this point, one of the civilians was in grave danger, but was saved by Akron, who was launched by Park Do-hek. Akron pulled the civilian from the monster's clutches and took him to a safe distance. The monster from the large-scale outbreak was in great confusion and did not understand what was happening. Then the robot golem Akron used a magic spell and attacked the monster with flaming palms. The civilian was very glad to be alive and thanked the Akron robot for his rescue. Akron continued to magically attack the monsters, but some of them were resistant to this type of attack. One of the monsters was ready to strike Akron, but its location was already established and it was struck down. Mr. Choi Daeho helped Akron clear the area of monsters and protect the civilians. Then the golem assessed the situation and reported that the area had been cleared of monsters and civilians evacuated to safety. Choi Daeho-san understood that Park Do-hek's golem never ceased to amaze him. Mrs. Cho Changmi attacked the monsters in another outbreak and received signals about the location of the survivors. Cho Changmi was the director of the Awakened Management Branch and possessed many skills as an Awakened. Therefore, she took the form of the monsters rather quickly and immediately trapped them in her spider-like trap. After which, she activated the effect of the magic spell and took away all the monsters' lives. She was very strong, and after quickly dealing with all the monsters of the outbreak, asked to be shown the way to the survivors. Kang Soin and Julia from the Taewa Guild, who were sitting on the roof of the skyscraper, were watching. They were delighted to see such a marvelous sight, with many large-scale flashes. They watched as the courageous Daeho, who was the deputy director of the Awakened Control, fought the monsters. Kang Soin asked Julia to look the other way. She thought she saw Baek Do-hee. She said she was like, and saw Ryunami get shot in the stomach. Kang Soin said that Ryunami would be a great help to them if she just took her life today. Then they saw Pak Do-hek, who was the main reason for their presence, and they wanted to see his skills. Pak Do-hek used Healing Gimp to treat Ryunami and said that he rarely used it because it took a lot of mana. Baek Do-hee, seeing his ability, said that it was higher than the recovery skill of a rank B healer. The observing Awakened ones were surprised at Pak Do-hek's abilities because their rank was higher, but they were completely useless. Pak Do-hek reported that the outside of the wound was healed, but there was still poison inside, so Ryunami needed to sit for a while. The director reported to the Awakened that civilian survivors said they saw a huge monster inside the department store. After receiving this communication message, he thought that this monster was most likely the boss, so he decided to go there and take a look. When Pak Do-hek entered the department store, he saw a huge monster and barely managed to dodge the sudden attack. Kang Soin said that it was Poison Arama, who was an AV-ranked boss. Those watching were very surprised that the E-ranked Do-hek E-Park was able to dodge the venomous arachne's sudden attack. Kang Soin and Julia from the Daehwa Guild were discussing that Baek Do-hee was a complete zero in management and didn't understand why she became a guild master. After using several fire projectiles, Pa Do-hek realized that things were bad because there was no reaction at all. The awakened guildmates of the Chonson Guild realized that the mages should move away, since the poisonous Acra was resistant to magic. Seeing that the monster was attacking the pack, Do-hek put up a magical shield that was beginning to collapse. Julia said that they can't hit the boss monster because they have half the defense against physical attacks. Kang Soin and Julia from the Daehwa Guild realized that they all couldn't win today because they didn't have strong players on their team. Pak Do-hek realized that he could only hit the monster if he got closer to it while avoiding its attacks. The awakened one arrived and asked Do-hek to help her, saying that she would hold off the monster's attacks and he should get closer. Awakened easily and quickly enough, repelled the poisonous monster's attacks, diverting all of its attention to herself. He realized that the awakened arriving girl was doing a great job, but didn't know who she was or how she knew his name. He realized that if he could strike and disable the monster's legs, the awakened one could easily end this battle. Then he combined the armor shield power acceleration and sent them magically to the stranger. Applying the fire arrow, Pak Do-hek realized that he should be helped very well. Using a few more magic spells, he increased the powers of the awakened one by several times. Because of this, the awakened girl quickly, deftly, and easily dealt with the monster boss and took his life. Pak Do-hek, who was watching carefully, was very happy that they had succeeded and that he had calculated his help correctly. After coming to her senses a bit and catching her breath, the awakened girl removed the mask from her face and asked Do-hek why he didn't remember her since it was Shin Yu-hee. Yu-hee came up to him and said they hadn't seen each other in a while, and Pak Do-hek was surprised that she was also awakened. Shin Yu-hee replied that she worked for a guild in Britain, and recently her contract expired, so she returned to Korea. Seeing the new outbreak, they realized they didn't have time to chat, so they decided to deal with the monsters first. The deputy director informed Mr. Pak Do-hek that to join them at Point B. The director said that she too would join them because she was already there and suggested that they spread out. Pak Do-hek responded via communications that he would join them, and Shin Yu-hee responded that she was here to defend the territory. She said that once the outbreak was over, she would definitely come look for Pak Do-hek at the Jongseong Guild. Pak Do-hek was very happy to meet her and said that they would definitely see each other later. Kang Soin and Julia from the Taewa Guild weren't sure of Pak Do-hek's strength, but realized that they were above average. To top it all off, they saw that Pak Do-hek had a healing skill and could use it. Kang Soin and Julia from the Daehwa Guild realized that right now they only needed to observe him to appreciate all of his skills. 3 days later, the large-scale outbreaks were completely suppressed, and Pak Do-hek saw his performance greatly improved. He realized that he was able to reach 4th grade, and the wizard level had risen to 31st. He realized that he had managed to get 3 special spells from the store on Deus, but he couldn't find anything else on the local server. Shin Taepon, who he had saved in the last outbreak, walked into his office and thanked him for calling him. Pak Do-hek asked him to sit down and wanted to discuss some details and issues with him. Shin Taepon didn't think Pak Do-hek would contact him again, and he replied that he needed help with long-term assets. Pak Do-hek asked him to speak to him informally because they were the same age. Shin Taepon was nervous and didn't understand how he could even talk to Mr. Park Do-hek. Park Do-hek laughed and reminded about informality, then Shin Taepon replied that he would try. Shin Taepon relaxed and said he would speak informally. Park Do-hek replied that he was much more comfortable that way. Then he asked if there was anything else, besides financial planning, that he could help with seeing the other world's book on the table. Pak Do-hek confirmed and said that he had recently begun to take an interest in otherworld linguistic books. He asked him to find the books and tools he needed, and told him he was willing to pay for everything, holding out a contract for him to read. Shin Taepon asked what he meant, that he would be something like a manager. Pak Do-hek said he wanted to build a collection of all the linguistic books of the other world. After familiarizing himself with the contract, Shin Taepon said he'd be happy to run his errands and asked when he should start. Park Do-hek handed him a card with a 1,000,000,000 limit and told him that he would be in touch, and now he could get to work. Park Do-hek reported that he had another meeting for today and asked Shin Taepon to try his best. Shin Taepon said he could rely on him, and they went their separate ways. In the training dungeon, Shin Yuha was teaching Mi Sonmi her secret fighting techniques, saying that Mi Sonmi was quite a fast learner and performed well. Park Do-hek entered the training room and noticed that Yuhi and Mi Sonmi had come early enough. Shin Yuhi replied that she wanted to look around, but only found Sonmi, so she decided to have a duel. Shin Yuhi said that even in Britain, she hadn't met someone who answered the role of tanker so well and praised Mi Sonmi. Park Do-hyuk asked Mi Sonmi's opinion, and she said that if she was distracted for a second, her armor wouldn't hold up. Mi Sonmi said she felt like she was fighting Do-hek, and Yuhi thanked her for that compliment. Mr. Park Do-hek was glad they had a good first impression of each other. He said the reason he called them was because he wanted to temporarily hire Juhi on their team. Mi Sonmi was glad, because then they would have an attacker they lacked in raid formation. Shin Yuha said that she would be happy to have such a tanker and all-round Do-hek by her side, so she can always go forward. He asked Shin Yuhi to trust him, and start going crazy as usual, and he promised to look after her. She replied that she wouldn't want to hear him say that, and Park Do-hek asked what he had said. Watching their verbal altercation and informality of communication, Mi Sonmi asked that they must have been very close. Park Do-hek apologized to Mi Sonmi for not properly introducing them to Shin Yuha. He pointed at Shin Yuha and said that he had known this girl since middle school since they studied together. Shin Yuha hugged Park Do-hek and added that she was his girlfriend and watched carefully at Mi Sonmi's reaction. Guild tank. Jongsun couldn't believe it and tried to hide her disappointment and displeasure. Park Do-hek pushed her away and said that they may have dated in high school, but that was over a decade ago. Shin Yuha said he was rude because he was her first love, and they did all kinds of naughty things, and Park Do-hek said enough of the past. He suggested they go to the dungeon and test their bond as a team, and the girls agreed. Suddenly, Park Do-hek received a notification that a quest to increase his rank had been activated. Once inside, he read that the start of the D-rank promotion quest had begun. Once inside the quest, he looked around and realized that before him was a temple of nightmares. This place was conquered by Valarax, who was a devil wanting to conquer the middle world. The object of his curse was the most valuable monastery in Deshiguan, and it was there that Valarax subjugated him. Thus the most sacred place became subservient to the devil and turned into a temple of moral corruption. Walking down to the temple, Park Do-hek didn't understand why the world of his game was so closely tied to promotion quests. He remembered that not too long ago he had met Berhard, who was also a character in his favorite game. Park Do-hek reflected that everything that had to do with leveling up, or his actions, had to do with the DF game as well. He thought that this little mechanism had only affected him, but realized that the game was too connected to the Awakened. He realized that the DF world was built into the Awakened system, so he decided to take a detailed look at the game after the quest. After seeing many monsters, he decided to activate the new spells he got from the books on the Deus market. Extending his arm forward, Park Do-hek used the Ice Storm magic spell, which caused a whirlwind of ice. He saw that some of the monsters withstood his attack and continued to move towards him. Then he saw that they had stone skin and realized that the ice storm didn't have a large killing radius. Then he changed tactics and applied acceleration along with flight to evaluate all his skills in real combat. He realized it wasn't fast enough, but it should have been enough for this fight. Once above the monsters, Park Do-hek applied the fireball magic spell and released a projectile. Looking down, Pak Do-hek realized that all the monsters had fallen to the bottom floor, and he decided to go down to have a look. Then a statue of Lakato appeared in front of him and declared that all violators of his peace would be deprived of life. Pak Do-hek realized that Lakato's blade had a special spell on it, which meant he needed to avoid cuts. He realized that many techniques and types of attacks didn't work on Lakato, but poison attacks should be enough to deal damage. So, calming down, he used the poison arrow magic spell and accelerated even faster. He realized he had found the place after his 50th raid in DF and continued to keep it a secret. Pak Do-hek realized that he had succeeded in luring the statue to the place of its reboot. Thus, the keeper of the temple statue, Lakanto, could not leave his position. Pak Do-hek saw what he had and realized that he would use it however he wanted and explore everything exactly like in the DF game. The statue of Lakanto could not move while in this position and was gradually completely poisoned by the effect of the poison arrow. The system congratulated Pak Do-hek on his D rank and informed him that he could choose a special spell. He realized that there were no healers before, so he chose the healing spell. But starting now, he planned to work as a team, so he chose to draft Fury. This spell increased the team's combat ability by 250% for 2 minutes. On the street, passersby were fans of Pak Do-hek and asked for his autograph and wondered what his secret was. Fans wondered if he was recruiting the Awakened into his team, but their conversation was interrupted by a car. Ko Yeri, who represented the American Freedom Guild, came out of it and wanted to invite him to join them. Ko Yeri asked if she could take up some of his time if Pak Do-hek wasn't already very busy. Pak Do-hek was surprised and wondered what such a large guild wanted from him. Ko Yeri reported that after all she had heard about him, she had come to talk to him about the dungeon. Pak Do-hek immediately decided to warn her that he had no plans to join another guild. Ko Yeri understood this and said that she had come to discuss C-rank dungeons with him. After a little thought, Pak Do-hek agreed and followed her to the car. He agreed to go into the car because Ko Yeri reported that there were too many people around. She informed him that the Free Guild was planning an attack on the C-rank dungeon in America. Ko Yeri said that the guild master planned to invite him as a partner in the pack, but Pak Do-hek thought that there were already many strong ones there. Ko Yeri replied that he was right, but they didn't have anyone like him, and that's why she came to hire an Awakened D rank. Ko Yeri replied that he alone was far more effective than 3 separate people awakened, of different ranks and different directions. Ko Yeri reported that the choice of her Freedom Guild master was quite obvious. She replied that as a reward, she could offer him the choice of a unique rank relic. She informed him that she wasn't fooling him and held out a contract on behalf of Guildmaster Brox. Seeing that Pak Do-hek was reading the terms of the contract, she clarified what he thought about it. Pak Do-hek realized that he had nothing to lose and there should be no A-rank, awakened ones there, and he would have a chance to try out their territory. Ko Yeri looked out the car window and reported that they were already close by, near the destination of their arrival. Pak Do-hek turned to Mrs. Ko Yeri and replied that he was willing to accept her offer from the master of the Freedom Guild. Pak Do-hek said that he would definitely contact her as soon as he cleared his schedule. Ko Yeri was very happy that Pak Do-hek had agreed and said that she would immediately notify her American Freedom Guild master about it. After dropping Pak Do-hek off from the vehicle, she reminded him that she would look forward to his call. The driver was worried and asked Ms. Yeri if it was scary that they hadn't talked about membership in the Freedom Guild. She replied that she had done the right thing. Because Do-hek could not be bribed with money, all he needed was experience. She informed him that she would let him have an unforgettable experience and then make it so that he just couldn't say no to them. At Pak Do-hek's stairwell, Kang-sun and Julia from the Taehwa Guild tried to open his door, but there were a lot of guards there. Kang-sun realized that there were a lot of mana sensors, and if one made a wrong move, one could lose one's life. Julia realized that he had spent more than 50 billion, and she could feel the energy of the dimension stones inside the room. Kang-sun and Julia from the Taehwa Guild were thinking about how to get through such home defenses. They wanted to get in, given the price of Do-hek's pack stock. They realized that management was involved. Kim So-eun realized that in the past, the management had given her a lot of support, after which struck from the back. Kim So-eun realized that when she thought about the past, she couldn't contain her negative energy, and they heard the elevator arrive at this floor. Julia was very surprised that the elevator was empty, and there was absolutely no one inside. Confused, they didn't notice that there was already a man standing behind them. Seeing 2 girls he did not know near his door, Pak Do-hek asked who they were. Pak Do-hek scrutinized them and their appearance, and concluded that they were not his mere fans. The D-rank awakened man was not positive towards them, and clarified what they wanted from him and why they had come. Kim So-eun replied that they would talk to him later, since this wasn't the best place to talk. Julia asked her sister to leave the place, and Park Do-hek replied that it was only their choice. Kang So-eun and Julia from the Daehwa Guild called the elevator and stepped into it one last time to carefully inspect Do-hek's pack. Park Do-hek was very upset because he thought it was finally quiet around his person. He spent 2 days creating all the necessary items for the Jungshung Guild and finishing things in Korea. After that, he met with Mi Son-mi and Shin Yu-hee again to explain the whole situation. Next, Park Do-hek scrutinized the contents of the book he had recently received for his linguistic collection. After that, he quietly gathered all his belongings and prepared for the raid in the American Freedom Guild. Upon arriving in New York, From went to the Freedom Guild building, where he was greeted by the head of the guild. Shaking his hand, Park Do-hek was surprised to see the head of the best guild in the United States of America. Brox introduced himself to Park Do-hek and said that he was the head of the strongest American guild called Freedom. Park Do-hek was surprised that he had so many otherworld books, and Brox replied that he had studied the language of the other world. Brox explained that he had specifically studied the language because he hoped to talk to people from another world. Park Do-hek was greatly surprised by this answer, and Brox asked him to sit down and listen to him. Brox informed him ready to talk frankly, and said that he had recently received some rather interesting news. He reported that in the dungeon, he met a man who spoke the language of another world very quickly, but he was robbed of his life. Then Park Do-hek assumed that the dungeon they were going to this time would be the one Brox was talking about. Brox said they wanted to find other traces of another world, but the limit to enter the dungeon was only 6 people. It was then that Park Do-hek realized why Brox was interested in him specifically and his ability to combine the 3 awakened ones. Brox explained that a normal awakened possessed only 1 ability and could raise it to 3 per level for the rest of his life. Brox demonstrated that he also possessed 1 ability, but other than that, he could not use magic or other skills. Thanks to Do-hek, who could wield 3 abilities, they could combine different combinations when attacking. Park Do-hek realized that Brox would want to invite him to the guild, but he wanted to take the chance to see the dungeon and obtain the relic. Brox stood up and said he was done talking and ready to fulfill his promise. After moving some of the books, Brox opened a secret room and invited Park Do-hek into it. He reported that there were relics here that he didn't need and didn't use because he had much better substitutes. At a glance, Park Do-hek realized that there were also relics here that had a level above unique. Brox said he could have them if he could recognize them, and Park Do-hek realized he wanted to see the recognizer. Touching the relic, Stan's Park Do-hek applied a recognition spell and began receiving summaries of all the items. After examining all the items with the recognizer, Park Do-hek said he would take Kata's ring, which accelerated mana replenishment. Brox said he was happy with his choice and invited him to come to the briefing room before the raid. Park Do-hek asked if Mr. Brox would be going with them, and the master replied that he flew to France on business. The master invited him into the meeting room and introduced him to the entire team. The first to be introduced was the chief tanker of the C rank of the Freedom Guild, Larson. Next, Park Do-hek saw the awakened S-ranked melee master Sarah. Then he was introduced to Lincoln, who also had a C rank awakened and was the main attack tank. The last to be introduced was Rie, who was a ranged master and had an A rank awakened. Descending into the dungeon, the team was surprised by the poisonous rain, and they realized that without Park Do-hek's armor, they would have a harder time. Sarah noticed that even Mr. Pak's buffs were completely different, and noted that it was the first time she had received so many buffs. Sensing the monsters approaching, Park Do-hek asked everyone to get ready and reported that they were close by. The entire Freedom Guild team along with Park Do-hek prepared to attack and defend. Lincoln, as the main attacking tank, immediately attacked the monsters and protected everyone with his shield. Lincoln was very militant and realized that there was no way he was going to lose to some monsters. Sarah saw that Lincoln was able to hold back the attack of the monsters and immediately began to attack them with great speed. Sarah wanted to demonstrate her teamwork skills to Park Do-hek, so she also used poison. Park Do-hek saw how deftly Sarah and Ria handled those monsters and thought he had to find the monster's master. By changing the mini drone review, he managed to find the monsters that were the main ones. He realized that since they didn't show a reaction to the mini drone, they were very engrossed in controlling the monsters, and Park Do-hek applied Akron. The guild master watched as Park Do-hek controlled the situation with his golem and mini drones and understood why he wasn't playing on the team. Park Do-hek used the spatial door and brought them a life-deprived black monster through it. The Freedom Guild master was surprised to see the spatial door, as it was a rarity among mages. Even more surprising to the American Guildmaster was that Park Do-hek was only a rank D awakened. Pak Do-hek was confused and asked why Yeri was looking at him like that since she was supposed to use her firepower. Yeri looked at him and didn't understand how it was possible to have such a rapid increase in abilities. She was greatly surprised by such a thing. The American Guild Master smiled and realized that she now wanted to know more about Pak Do-hek. The raid continued, and the further they progressed, the more abilities Pak Do-hek demonstrated. He demonstrated the ability to destroy annoying debuffs through magic spells, and even helped the team through the dangerous parts of the dungeon with an invisibility spell. Thus, the team got to the boss much faster than actually planned. Looking around, Pak Do-hek began to realize that he had seen it all before, which meant he wasn't the first time he had been here. Realizing that he had seen this location in the game, Pak Do-hek knew that if the type from the game were here, they would be quite difficult. Then everyone saw the boss of this dungeon. It was the Black Prince Arkans, who belonged to the C rank. It was the first time the rest of the team had seen such a mob, and they were very wary of the monster's chaotic energy. Black Prince Arkanes didn't want a long battle and immediately started attacking them, wanting to take everyone's life. Pak Do-hek was trying to assess the situation and come up with tactics to defeat this C-rank boss monster that was very strong. Akron was able to hold off the Black Prince's first attack, but was badly damaged. Rhea asked everyone to concentrate and come up with a certain formation to win this battle. The Freedom Guild Master turned to Pak Do-hek and said that they should leave, but Pak Do-hek realized that they would not win by regrouping. Then he turned to everyone and said that after the first attack, Arkanes would target him as the weakest among them. He said he would later explain how he knew this, so he asked me to trust him and listen. Opening the spatial door, Pak Do-hek explained that Arkanes would let his guard down, not realizing how the enemy teleported. Accordingly, at this point, the tanker and melee master will be able to make the first attack against him. Sarah and Yeri took Pak Do-hek's advice and did exactly as he informed them. Sarah didn't understand why it was so difficult for them to attack this monster and deal with the Black Prince. The Black Prince activated a new, stronger attack in hopes that all of his opponents would be rendered lifeless. Pak Do-hek applied the sword's underground magic spell, which was a debuff. All the team members were surprised at such skills of Pak Do-hek and did not understand what was required of them next. The soul separation debuff was that after 90 seconds, the soul was separated from the body permanently. Pak Do-hek asked everyone who touched the sword to come to him immediately, and Lincoln asked him to provoke Arkanes into attacking him. Tank Lincoln obeyed Pak Do-hek and diverted the attention of the monster, who was already staring at him intently and ready to attack. Barely holding back the Black Prince's attack, Lincoln asked the team members to hurry up. Gathering those caught in the debuff, Pak Do-hek applied Dispel Magic, but he failed to cancel the debuff the first time. He was starting to get nervous and realized that dispelling the magic would nullify the spell. However, the likelihood of success depended on the level of wisdom. He tried the Dispel Magic spell again, and the second time, he succeeded in nullifying the debuffs. At this time, Lincoln's defense was breached, and he urgently needed the team's help, or he would have been robbed of his life. Black Prince Arkanes asked his minions to come out, and a mob of monsters was advancing towards the Freedom Guild team. Pak Do-hek said he would take care of the minions and asked them to help Lincoln. All the members of the Freedom Guild team listened to Pak Do-hek and went to attack the Black Prince while assisting Lincoln. Sarah used the martial art technique of release and directed her attack at Arkanes. In this attack, she was actively assisted by Yeri, who was a master of the American Freedom Guild. Black Prince Arkanes was starting to get very angry, thinking about the fact that they were all annoying him very much. Arkanes pushed everyone away from him and built a protective shield around himself that looked like a red ball. Seeing this, Pak Do-hek said that they should attack him with their strongest attack, and this was their only chance. At that time, Pak Do-hek used the special spell Furious Summoning and increased the stats of all the team members. They didn't realize what this skill was, because all the pain had just disappeared, and they only had 2 minutes to launch an attack. They were surprised Do-hek had such a buff, since they were going to take a potion, but this was even better. Pak Do-hek shouted that Arkanes was not vulnerable to physical attacks now, but that Skillet was lowering his resistance to magic, so he urged everyone to use it. The entire team took turns using various magic spells to damage Arkans. Lincoln applied the Guardian of Light and thus shattered the Black Prince's defense. Larson used the Hammer of Justice, which was quite a strong type of magic attack. Black Prince Arkanes didn't want to give up and decided to use his most powerful attack against his opponents. But Raye's ranged master was able to hold back this attack, and no one from the team was hurt. She asked them to be more careful and stay alert during the battle. But she didn't notice how Arkanes was behind her and was able to attack her from behind. Seeing this, Sarah asked Ray to duck down and gave a strong attack to the boss monster. While still under the effect of the attack, the monster saw Yeri about to attack him with fireballs. Pak Do-hek took advantage of the situation and used a color deprivation spell on Arcanase. The attack was indeed very powerful, and all the team members watched in hope that they had managed to take the life of Arcanase. But unfortunately, they saw the Black Prince raise his head and just laugh at them, calling them insects. Lincoln was surprised that the monster had withstood their attacks and realized that they needed to finish before the monster regained its strength. Black Prince Arcanus didn't want to lose so easily, so he activated all his forces and launched a powerful attack. After such a strong attack from the enemy, all members of the team were injured and were trying to figure out who was in one piece and how much. When they looked at Pak Do-hek's condition, they were very surprised and asked why only he was uninjured. Pak Do-hek looked at them and at himself and replied that he didn't know why he wasn't injured. The Black Prince fell to his knees and turned to Pak Do-hek, explaining that the lack of injuries was due to the source of the power. Arcanus explained that he had put all his energy into the last explosion, which meant their souls were related. The Black Prince explained to him that all of his people had been stripped of their lives while traveling through time and space, which means there was something similar between Pak Do-hek and Arcanus, and he knew him from the DF game. Arcanus handed Do-hek the pendant and ring, and asked that if he met people of his world, that he protect them and not make them experience hell. Black Prince Arcanus was robbed of his life and begged Pak Do-hek with his last words to remember his words. Pak Do-hek's level had been raised, and he had a translation book in his hand that could translate a book of another world in 2 days, as well as 2 unique items, Desmond's Ring and Infinity Ring, which gave immunity to all buffs and psychological attacks. Among the first reward for Arcanus, he saw the stones in the book and realized that the space stones he had to leave behind. Seeing that the team members were still unconscious, he decided to take the spellbook that contained the 5th level spell, Solar Flame. Pak Do-hek, without a second thought, decided to immediately try out the power and extent of this Sun Flame spell. He realized that it was spreading its effects over a radius of about 5 meters. Yeri woke up and felt warm, asking Do-hek what it was. And so ended their raid on a rank C dungeon, where they still managed to win. Back at the Freedom Guild building, they exchanged contacts with the team, and he realized they were all impressed. Guildmaster Ko Yeri offered Do-hek a place in the guild, but he declined and returned to Korea. In the awakened control building, the master woke Daeho up, saying that she had an important story about Pak Do-hek. Daeho said it seemed quiet, but the director said Daeho was in America and raided the dungeon. Daeho was very surprised because the Freedom Guild must have kept it a secret, and he couldn't believe that the headmistress was able to get such information. The most important thing was that after the raid, the whole team was impressed, and the Freedom Guild tried to hire him. Daeho realized that if such a large guild was trying to poach Do-hek, they couldn't just sit back. The director suggested that Puck be called in for a dungeon expedition on behalf of management. Daeho thought it was a great idea and said he would contact Yunso so that she would invite him to negotiate. Pak Do-hek looked at the table with his stats and realized that the stats had gone up. Pak Do-hek realized that in his absence, Shintapun had done a good job finding the right book, so he wanted to reward him. Thanks to the rare Pak books, Do-hek learned many magic spells that he tested on a simple blade, and they worked. Pak Do-hek was himself surprised that thanks to the spells, the item's level could now increase as well. He even decided to look for something for close combat and realized he needed to up his gauntlet. He decided to call Lee Yunso, but when he picked up the phone, he saw that she had already called him. He asked her if there was a unique mitten on sale today at Deos Mart, since he wanted to purchase one. After checking the Deos Mart database, Lee Yunso reported that one was on sale today. Pak Do-hek asked if he could put his skill up for auction, which surprised Lee Yunso very much, because usually only items were sold. Mrs. Lizzie arrived at the Deus Marte auction, even though she said she wasn't interested in today's exhibit. Lizzie replied that she had gotten a message a few hours ago that there was going to be a special auction today. She explained that if Deus Market announces such an auction, it is imperative that you attend so that you don't regret it later. Lee Yunso, who was conducting the auction at the Deos Mart arena, reported that their regular auction had come to an end. She stated that it was time for them to move on to the special portion and welcomed Mr. Do-hek, who was the organizer of this auction. Pak Do-hek welcomed everyone to the auction and announced that this was his second visit to the Deos Market arena. He said that he did not come here to trade items, but to sell his special skill. Jungwo was surprised and asked Lizzie if it was possible to trade the powers of an awakened one. She realized that he wanted to sell a very valuable skill, so the market allowed for a special auction. Pak Do-hek said that only 10 buyers would be able to take advantage of this opportunity. He could raise their weapon level by 1. Master Lizzie was so thoroughly surprised that she shouted that she just couldn't believe it. Everyone began to discuss whether such a spell existed, but realized that Dohek was the only one who knew how to use spells. Pak Dohek was surprised that the director of White Lotus came and said he had never cheated anyone before. Mrs. Min Sung-yul was wary and didn't want to trust Pak Dohek this time. Pak Dohek said that any weapon below legendary could be upgraded by 1 level. But he warned if anyone perceived him as an enemy, then the level of things would immediately drop to 0. Min Song-yul said that there are many people who can enchant spatial and gemstones. Pak Dohek said she was thinking too primitive, and it wasn't his plan, so he announced the sale of the skill, which became a news sensation. Pak Dohek decided to start the auction, saying that the starting price was only 500 million won, which was really too small a price. Lee Yun-so said that everything was sold for 2 billion won, and the total was 20 billion won, which meant he could proceed to fulfill the conditions. Pak Dohek asked the buyers to put the weapon in front of him and started the upgrade that increased the stats by a whole level. Everyone watched in amazement and could not believe their eyes because they had seen such a thing for the first time and even considered it a fantasy. Master Lizzie couldn't believe that her Sethito had really become legendary level since she had used it in battles for so many years. Park Dohek turned to Lee Yun-so and said that it was time for him to leave, and she let him go, thanking him for his hard work and fulfillment of his obligations. He noticed that Min Seonal was together with Jang Hyung-soo and Kim Hoon of the Mukong Guild, which meant that she was preparing some kind of plan not in his favor. He realized that they wouldn't act like Min Song-yul, but he still had to be cautious because the danger was about to happen. Choi Daeho called him and asked him if he had finished his business at the Deos Mart and was glad to meet him, for he was a model for him among the awakened. Park Dohek replied that the auction had gone smoothly and he had managed to achieve what he wanted to get, which meant he was now ready for other business. Choi Daeho said it was great news and invited him to go to a meeting place to negotiate and settle everything. Min Sung-gyul said she called them to see Dohek's pack, who was her target, and to assess his level of ability and skill. Guildmaster Mukon Chan Hyun-soo asked who ended up being their target, Pak Dohek or Guild Jong-sung, because she spoke negatively about all of them. Min Song-yul answered both of them and proposed a temporary truce because they now had a common enemy and it would be great to unite their forces. She explained that if they let things go, they would end up being just toys in the hands of Pak Dohek, so they needed to destroy him. Cho Chomi entered the dungeon and realized that after 2 hours, they still hadn't managed to find out anything about this dungeon, and thus couldn't pick up the awakened one. She was very frustrated that after many attempts, there was only failure, and they had not gotten any information that could help them in any way. Daeho told the arriving Pak Dohek that the dungeon had only recently appeared, so it was still unknown and therefore dangerous. Park Dohek was surprised that Cho Chang-mi said that they had left the dungeon unattended for a long time and didn't know when the outbreak would happen. Management Director Cho Chun-mi explained that they had originally planned to invite Dohek to another private dungeon, but there was a difficulty. Cho Chun-mi explained that after the report, they found out that there was an open dungeon at that location but had no other information. For the safety of the citizens, they tried to quickly disarm him, but failed, so they called Dohek to settle. Bowing their heads before Pak Dohek, they confessed that they no longer knew what to do in such a difficult and complicated situation. Pak Dohek was surprised that the monster inside was so strong that the 2 SS rank awakened ones couldn't handle it, so they invited him in. Cho Chomi explained that it wasn't about strength in the dungeon, with many invisible traps and monsters resistant to magic attributes and attacks. Since there were too many factors affecting the outcome, they turned to Pak Dohek for help, knowing of his comprehensiveness and skills. Mr. Pak Dohek replied that he had only come to them because he had received a private invitation to the dungeon, but was willing to assist them. Cho Chomi apologized to him and replied that they couldn't just ignore this dungeon, so they were asking for his help. Park Dohek said he was risking his life, so he was hoping for a decent reward, and Cho Chun-mi asked what he wanted. Pak Dohek wanted to be assigned a ranked dungeon, where he would have complete freedom and individual access. Choi Daeho thought it was already overkill, but the director of Awakened Management stopped him. She said she would take care of it, and asked him to cool his ardor and not act like that. Pak Dohek realized that the dungeon had the ability to regenerate and gain experience points to level up. Cho Chomi explained that this is impossible because the dungeons belong to the government, and transferring ownership is impossible. So she suggested that he consider the option that the dungeon would belong to the UE, but he could use it as he saw fit. Park Do-hyuk thought about it and agreed. Then Cho Chun-mi said that there was one condition that he must unconditionally accept. She said that if the dungeon was open too long and caused an outbreak, he would have to take full responsibility, and he agreed. After settling matters, she informed him that as soon as he entered the dungeon, he should immediately flee, because if he delays even a second, the poison cloud will catch up with him, and then it will get harder. Cho Chomi warned him that after he left the cloud, his path would be interrupted by fiery lava. Pak Do-hek was able to overcome the lava with the help of walls, but there were many traps around him. He decided to be more cautious and activated the magic shield that allowed him to contain the effects of the traps. Cho Chonmi warned him that there would be a dark tunnel that he would have to go through on his own. She informed him that the road in total darkness was very long, and he needed to find a light in total darkness. Realizing that in total darkness he would be perfect prey, Pak Do-hek immediately activated his infrared vision. Then he saw that there were many poisonous snakes and other monsters around him. Seeing this, he immediately applied a lightning discharge magic spell to clear the road of snakes. Pak Do-hek realized that since this dungeon was difficult to clear, it gave a very large amount of experience points. He realized he couldn't relax for a second, so he immediately activated all his drones to find the right path. Cho Chomi and Daeho were waiting at the entrance to the dungeon when Lee Yunso came in to tell them that she hadn't brought her equipment with her. Choi Daeho said that only one person can enter the cave, so if Park Do-hek is alive, Lee Yunso can't go any further. Lee Yunso clarified if that was all that was required of her, and Daeho replied that she wouldn't be able to handle a rank B dungeon anyway. Lee Yunso realized that several hours had already passed, and the director replied that they only had to wait patiently for the result. Daeho realized that if Pak Do-hek failed, they would have to ask for help from the high-ranking guilds. So they hoped that Lee Yunso would come back with good news for them, that Park Do-hek is still alive and doing well. After a while, Park Do-hek still managed to reach the boss's room. He realized that if he didn't use the drones, he would definitely be caught in a trap and might even have been deprived of life already. Entering the room, he was very surprised that the room was completely empty, and he didn't realize where the boss of this dungeon was. Looking around, he was very surprised to see a woman who was chained up. Looking closely, he began to doubt that it was a man, so he asked who it was. Seeing the monster in front of him, he was surprised that the monster was asking where he got Arcaness's stuff from. Lich Denyuk was an A-rank boss among monsters, and Pak Do-hek realized that he hadn't encountered one on the floors of the DF game. Pak Do-hek replied that he had no desire to answer the monster. He realized that he was lower than Arcaness, but this time, he was alone. Pak Do-hek was ready to attack and used the Radius Magic Glove, which was a legendary level relic. Lich Denyuk was a magic-type monster, and immediately used the spell spikes of darkness to make the first attack. Seeing that Pak Do-hek had managed to escape from the attack, the monster was surprised at his opponent's abilities. Then Pak Do-hek saw that the monster was weaving a new spell for a magic attack. Therefore, he immediately activated the magic shield to repel the attack of the Spear of Darkness. Lich Denyuk laughed that he wanted to repel his powerful attack with some weak shield. The monster's magic spell was able to destroy Pak Do-hek's shield, and he tried to avoid the direct attack. Then he decided to use a magic invisibility spell and hoped to fool the monster at least that way. After which he applied mirroring, and the monster saw a lot of Pak Do-hek's. Weaving a new spell, Lich Denyuk laughed, saying that his magic was just child's play. Lich Denyuk decided to destroy everyone in an instant and applied gravity imprisonment. But Pak Do-hek was more cunning and had already attacked the monster from the back, realizing that he was a strong mage. Then Lich Denyuk activated the lightning strike, and Pak Do-hek used the fireball magic spell. After damaging the monster, Pak Do-hek realized that the difference between the two was that he didn't need to cast the spell aloud. Lich Denyuk also activated his magic shield and didn't understand how Pak Do-hek could afford such a thing. Meanwhile, Lee Yunso touched the entrance of the dungeon and felt a strange energy. She screamed and froze as if she couldn't move at all and stared intently into the cave. Cho Chomi and Daeho were puzzled by what was happening and couldn't believe assuming there was a flash in front of them. At that time, they activated their magic skills and abilities and asked Lee Yunso to step back since she was without equipment. But out of the cave came Pak Do-hek, who was holding the same girl who was in the boss's room. He already had very little strength and was glad that he had managed to survive and leave the dungeon. After drinking a lot of water, Cho Chomi asked him if he had already come to his senses and could explain what had happened there. The awakened control director was also very curious about who was that girl he had brought out of the dungeon. Pak Do-hek replied that despite all the traps and monsters, he had managed to clear the dungeon safely. Cho Chomi couldn't believe that he was able to defeat an A-ranked boss by himself, and Pak Do-hek replied that it wasn't easy. He said that the fight itself lasted about 5 minutes, but in that time he used countless spells. Cho Chonmi didn't bother to ask him what he got in the dungeon since it was an unspoken rule. But she reported that the girl was the problem, and that was becoming a pretty big problem. Daeho said they may consider the girl Dohek's prey, or they may see her as someone who could pose a threat, so the choice is his. Choi Daeho explained that she was the only person ever found in the dungeon usually found items or relics or crystals.